Good.
Okay, it's on 3 o'clock. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Infrastructure and Services Committee, 13th September 2022. Before we start the meeting, as a mark of respect for the passing of Her Majesty the Queen, we will first receive a karakia from Evelyn, followed by a minute's silence. Thank you, Evelyn.
Tēnā rā koutou e rau rakatira mā. E inoi o te kingi. E hoa i tō mātou matu e te rangi ki runga noa atu, i nua noa atu koe. Ko koe te kingi o nā kingi, te āriki o nā āriki, o te tino kawana o nā rangatira. E titiro iho ana koe i runga e tō tōrauna ki no tangata katoa o te whenua. Tēnei mātou te tohi atu nei. Kia tirohia ata whaitia mai tō mātou rangatira pai. A kingi tiari te tūtoru, whakakia ia ki te kaho o tō wairua tapu, kia anga tonu aia ki tau i pai ai, ka haere ai i tō huarahi. Whakanohia nā mea papai o te rangi ki roto ki aia, o mai ki aia he pai, he oranga roa i tēnei ao. Whakakahania ia kia kore ai ona hua, riri katoa i aia, te mutunga e te noho i konei, kia whiwhi ia ki te haringa mutunga kore, ko ihu kraiti no hoki tō mātou arihi āmene. Whakareo atu tō toki ki runga, ki tō toki he tangata, he toki whakaroke, he toki nua, tua whakarere i te pō, ko whakamoia. Whakamaua te kakao o tō toki i o uri heki iho ki tū tapu ai tō whare arihi. Te rauhuia titi tonu ki tō pane, he tapu, he mā rohi rohi, he awe awe mō nā uri whakaheki tangata, te mana, te tapu, te arihi pokai whenua, te kāpuehu o te hahi o ingarangi koini iri hapati te tuarua, māranga mai tō toki ki runga, whitikina te kahu, ka tū hei tai whakawehi whenua. He kura hautu i nā kura tīwaka potanoa i te ao. Haere i runga i te huarahi o te takitini. Haere i runga i te huarahi o te takimano. Haere i runga i te huarahi kua takoto i o tūpuna arihi i haere i mua no atu i a koe. I oki oki, te hunga oki oki. Whakanaro atu rā i te pūtakitanga o rehua, i te huinga o te kahurangi. I moi rā i te mārietanga o te pō, ko aromai anō, koe i tō kororiatanga i tō atuanui i te rangi. May she rest in peace and rise in glory. Amen.
Thank you. Can I have everyone stand, please, in silence? Thank you. We have no Zoom attendees today. Apologies, we have Councillor Abbott, Ms. Pania Coote and His Worship.
Councillor Amundsen.
Councillor Amundsen, thank you for that. Can I please have someone move those? Councillor Lewis, second Councillor Soper. I'll put that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. That moves on now to the public forum. There were 4 speakers. Unfortunately, due to travel disruptions, Mr. Herself will be speaking at the next infrastructure meeting. So that takes us now to Tracy Peters. I'd like to welcome you to Tracy Peters here. Tracy will be speaking about the footpath management policy. policy. Tracy, you have 10 minutes, so what you can do is you can speak for 5 and have 5 minutes of questions, or just use the whole 10 speaking. It's up to you. Okay? Thanks.
I actually had a bit of a speech organised, but then I looked at all you guys sitting here. You look like you've got quite healthy legs. Is that a good guess? How many of you have tried getting around Invercargill streets with a walker or a sight stick or in a wheelchair? Any of you?
A walker.
So I've got a bit of a challenge for you. Let's see how much courage you guys have. Who here is prepared to come out with me as an observer for a couple of hours to wander around Invercargill streets and see what the actual difficulties are? I can describe them to you, but I think it's actually better if you see them as an observer or experience them. So who here has the courage to come out with me and observe the realities of getting around Invercargill streets? Excellent. So we can organise that, because honestly, me getting here today was an absolute mission. I had to go so far out of my way. I couldn't take a straight route to get here. It's just physically not possible. Partly because of the build, partly, but mostly because the transitions at traffic lights to transfer from a footpath to a road, you just can't do it. Not without flipping a wheelchair, and personally that's just not on my sort of timeline. So if any of you have the courage to come have a look, that'd be really good, because then you can actually see what the issue is. Because I have spoken to Russell Pearson and that on occasion, and Nathan Gill about bus stops and things, and they promised me that things will change. And they're doing their best, but nothing's changing. Like, for instance, I would try to catch the bus from Clifton to come into town, but I can't. Because the council redid the footpath. Did a beautiful job, but they put a piece of grass between the curb and the footpath. You can't get a wheelchair over it because it's mud, so I can't get on and off the bus. So it's things like that I want you to actually see. Not just to hear about it, but to actually see it. And as for things like curbside cafes and that, I think they have a lot of potential and they could actually be really, really good. But there's a few things to consider. If somebody is sight impaired, where are you going to put that seating? How are they actually going to get down the footpath without ending up in the road? Are they going to use the side of the building, or are you going to put the cafe seating there? So it's things like that I'd really like you to come out and actually see it firsthand, so you can see what the challenges are. Because the city's got so much potential, but I'd just like to see it done in a way that you don't have to redo it later. So has anybody got any questions?
Right. Okay, I'm going to open up to questions. Councillor Lewis, then Councillor Skill.
I believe one of the major problem, not one major problem, one major problem is getting out of vehicles and then trying to transport from in the force of traffic, or perhaps up to the bulbous areas where.
Yeah, it's really, really bad. If you, for instance, on D Street outside Spark or the radiology there, you pull in, and if your wheelchair's in the back, you're lifting the back of the vehicle open physically into traffic. Not only that, but the car park's actually physically not wide enough. So if you do get the wheelchair out of the back of the vehicle, they've then got to try and get it down to the door. And if you have another vehicle next to you, you physically can't do it. Because for a wheelchair user, the door has to open to its widest setting. If you all think for a second, when you open your car door, do you open it, let it go, and then get in? Or do you have one hand on your door and then get into the car? My thought would be most of you will have one hand on your door as you're getting in, because you haven't opened it completely. If you're, say, on, I think it's Devon Street, just out there, or Calvin Street actually, there's a wheelchair park down by Woodbridge. There's a bit of a problem. You'll get out, but there's no way you're going to get up on the curb unless you are physically in the traffic and go all the way down to the museum and then get up. It's not safe for the driver, it's not safe for the traffic, and it's certainly not safe for the wheelchair. So mobility parking has to be thought out a lot more carefully. When mobility parking first came along, people like me were passengers, and somebody would help us out of the vehicle and off we'd go. Well, I drive, I go out and I do things, but I can't get up on curbs, so I have to really think about it. And I'm using a driving service at the moment. We pulled up outside H&J Smith's. I was on the road, I couldn't get up onto the curb, so my driver actually stood out on the road so I could go down to the traffic lights to get up onto the curb, because there's no other way that I can get up on that. And if you are a rear load for a wheelchair vehicle, you need 7 metres minimum, absolutely 7 metres. You measure the length of the vehicle, you measure the open door, and you measure where you've physically got to situate a wheelchair to load it. If you are side entry, you need at least 3 metres, the width of the vehicle, the ramp, and getting it in. Our mobility parking is not fit for purpose. It's too narrow and it's too short and it's not safe.
I think there may be similar situations in South Invercargill, but one of the problems I've noticed there frequently.
Questions, these are.
The question being that where people are parking who aren't entitled to park, how do you cope with that? Thank you, Chair.
It's an ongoing issue. I try to deal with it with extreme care because some people can take offence. Often I will actually go up to them and say, hey look, my driver's about to pull up, would you guys be okay to just move for a couple of minutes so I can get in and out? And they'll do that if I see them parking and unloading. But it is a major issue, and it happens all over town where somebody else will park there and you just can't use the car park. It's just not possible.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Skill.
Through you, Chair, thank you for your presentation, which is somewhat concerning, to be fair. I just wonder, the question being, from a consultation process, are we as a council interacting with the disability groups when, with the likes of the CBD, the Langlands Hotel and all the new developments, are we proactively, because I know Russell has a real concern, a real penchant for attempting with the consultation, so are we doing enough from a consultation process? If we're not, we need to fix it clearly, but I'll be keen to hear from Russell also, if that's allowable, just his response to that question.
Unfortunately, we won't
Okay,
be doing
well, I'll
that.
go back to if you wouldn't mind. So back to that consultation process, is there not enough happening?
No, there's not enough happening. We often hear about things too late, or things have already been decided, or when you do make a decision, you haven't really taken into consideration the realities, which is why I invite you to actually come out and see it. Because I think your staff are doing best they can, but I have a suspicion that at times something's been lost in translation. For instance, when you let out a contract to a contractor, you might be saying, we want you to do this. But you're speaking to the supervisors, the actual crew that are doing the work. And I've had this conversation with some of the contractors that are doing Esk Street. I went down there in the initial stages and they had made a wooden ramp with a step like that. I couldn't use it. So I came up to the council and I had to talk to somebody. The lady downstairs was great. She took my details and said, oh, we'll talk about this and get back to you in a few months. And I thought, oh, great. And I went back down there and the contractor was there. And he came out to me and he says, oh, I made a ramp. And I was just wondering, what do you think of it? And I said, too high. He and I had a 5-minute conversation. The next day, problem solved. He just got some plywood and shaved it on down and did it. And those ramps that they are now using in East Street, much better.
So just to drill down further through you, Chair, with the CBD development and the Langlands, have you still got some concerns around both those developments?
I do have some serious concerns about those developments. You're making rain gardens, and they're nice, but are you going to put a barrier around them? Because if a wheelchair gets too close or a toddler gets too close, they're going to go into them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Scott. I'm going to go, we're just about at time. Our last one is Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Tracy, just wanted to know again in consultation, I know that the DPA isn't active in Invercargill at the moment. Is there a group that we are missing that you can tell us
You need to
about?
consult more with CCS. I'm with CCS, I'm one of the LAC there, but call them. They'll be happy to have a talk to you, have a discussion, but you really do need to consult with the community. And the CCS will be more than happy to come and have a chat and to sit down with you guys at the table and decide and figure out between us all what's realistic, what can you realistically do and what our needs are, and come together in the middle.
So CCS is taking the role that
Disability.
Disabled Persons Assembly would have taken some years ago.
If DPA was still functional, that'd be great. Unfortunately, we cannot get them to open up again down here, but we do have CCS, and CCS is actually a really fabulous organisation, and there are lots of people who consult through CCS. They have a wide membership basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is now 10 minutes, Tracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Mary O'Brien. I'm the Access Coordinator from CCS Disability Action.
Right, you're the next submitter. Yes.
Pardon?
You're the next submitter. Well done.
Yeah, sorry. I
No.
thought you were telling me to start.
No.
Oh, well,
Yeah, no, away you go. Yep.
No, I'll start again.
Yep.
No, carry on. Sorry.
No, it's all good. Sorry, no, sorry.
Okay, I did have a couple of slides if they would go.
Yep.
But, doesn't matter if they don't really. Oysters. Right. I did send.
What slide?
Oh, that's okay, right. Okay, I'm the Access Coordinator at CCS Disability Action, and first of all, I just want to, Tracy's story, our common stories right across, there we are, right, we're away. So.
And can we just bring the microphone a little bit closer? Thanks.
So, first
Right.
of all, say, just before I move on, the stories that Tracy tells are common across New Zealand, common across the world, and it's not just an inconvenience. 26% of the Southern population have got a disability. We've got an ageing population. Things are going to become more and more challenging. We're a disability organisation and we speak from that point of view, but the really important thing is that if you've got things right for disabled people, you've got things right for the rest of the population. And as people get older and we've got young people, things are going to become much more difficult. So that's that key thing. It's like you've got a sentinel population. And the other thing about disabled population, we're now getting quite a good research and evidence base about the consequences of that. So a lot of disabled people across New Zealand have trouble going to the doctor because they simply can't get there. Because kids can't get to school often, they have a poor education, so that carries on right through their life. They don't get a good tertiary education, they don't get good work, their well-being suffers. So, and just going back to, so this one here, we really support this whole idea of cafe licensing, and we totally agree with what you say about streets creating the vibrancy of the city. They do, but you've got to make sure everybody can use them. Every street or every intervention in the world where you increase pedestrianisation, you immediately get more people, they spend more money, people feel safer, it just goes on and on, they're endless benefits. So getting back to the cafe licensing, that image up there on the right, that's from NZTA pedestrian guidance. And if you look at the right there, there's a clear pathway along the building. That's also what's recommended by the NZTA in Road Traffic Standard 14, which is around provision for blind people who are blind and low vision. So if you have that clear walkway right along, people who have vision impairments and use a stick can go up and down. Everybody else can go up and down. You've got a through route in the middle for people who want to scoot along and walk quickly. And then on the left-hand side there, this is a place for tables, and you can see on that image, you've got some planter boxes, but you can also see there are transitions in the paving. So that signals to people that there are differences. So that's what we recommend for your for the cafe licensing thing. So that's just the safe, continuous that one, route of travel. The thing, safety is a key reason why people choose to use the footpaths. Now that's not just people with mobility issues, it's people who might want to catch the bus. If the footpath's safe and good and they can move along it quickly, they'll catch the bus to work. All of those things add in. It's not just one small group of people. I might just move down to the last slide now, please. So Tracy's spoken about consulting with the disabled community, and we're really happy to support you to do that. We do a lot of consultation around that. Anything that when you are working with people who have got disability or disadvantage, you really need to think who's missing out, and that's what you need to ask. So when you're thinking now about the footpaths, where are people going and why? Why, you know? And then that next thing is why, where aren't people going and why can't they go? Tracy mentioned mobility parks. We did some research quite a few years ago, and we thought there were about 30% of mobility parks being misused. A colleague of mine who does a lot of research into transport injury thinks it's closer to 50%. Most of the people who park there say, oh, I was only there 5 minutes. But if you go to town and you're in your van or your car and there is a limited number of parks and it's parked, most people just go home again because they've lost that opportunity. So that really is a big deal. So what we're saying about this process is that we recommend you conduct some street accessibility audits, and they're specialist audits. And then the other thing is use that to prioritise the improvements. So we're saying talk to the disabled community, find out who can and can't go where, and then use those findings, because you can't fix everything overnight, but you need to fix the areas that are the most important, that are causing the most obstructions and the hazards. And yeah, so I'm just thinking about some other things that Tracy said. Disabled people overall first of all, they probably don't go if it's inaccessible. Otherwise, they'll make less trips, or then if they can't make the trip, they'll make longer, more difficult trips. So that's the kind of thing that we have to deal with. The other things to think about, New Zealand standards are not up to date. We don't have best practice transport engineering and those sorts of things in there. So that's why when you get the information with the community, you do need to underpin that with expert access advice. Yeah. And this is why, after years and years and years of advocacy, that finally there is disability legislation before Parliament. But at this stage, we think it's not going to be effective. Anything else I should have said, Tracy? Yeah. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Right, we're at 7 minutes, so we've got 3 minutes for some short, sharp questions. So, Evelyn.
A question through Mr. Chair to Mary. Has the number and range of mobility, I don't know the right word is vehicles, but mobility devices, has that affected some of the kind of use that we're now seeing where disability spaces are not big enough or wide enough, or I totally see why you're saying about outside Spark, those sorts of places, but is it because the nature of the so we're not keeping up with the technology? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. Our standards aren't keeping up with the changes. So we now have bigger, heavier wheelchairs. So then people need a bigger vehicle, particularly electric chairs where people might need to use a van. So then you might get into the park, but you can't get out of it, especially rear loading vans. Yeah, and that's a really good sort of symbol. Yeah, that's definitely right.
And most people, not everybody, but most people who use mobility devices are passengers rather than drivers. But do we have quite a number of drivers now where the access points are not suitable? Because that's a different issue, isn't it? And it's people are making assumptions that everybody is going to be a passenger and they're going to be able to get out on the footpath. Yeah. And what we're hearing today, I believe, is that that is not necessarily as common as it used to be.
I think, yeah, you're right. Oh, it's more, yeah. Good example you're saying about people, like I have a friend who bungee jumps, does the luge, but there are parts in Dunedin where he can't get out of his car when he's the driver. Yeah. So what we've got to think about then is not block by block or crossing by crossing. You've got to look at a certain area, mark it off, audit it, make sure that you're fitting up with universal design for best practice transport engineering and those sorts. So you want to make some accessible routes, which means people can have an uninterrupted journey. Yeah,
so people can get out on the driver's side as well as on the passenger side,
right.
as well as from the rear.
So in essence, it means that we're asking the council to exceed the current standards, which aren't good enough. But that doesn't actually mean a lot more money. It just means asking and finding out how they should be, and then doing, often it's just leaving a bit more room, those sorts of things. Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay, thanks Evelyn. Right, we've got time for Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mary, can either you or Tracy quickly just point to one or two parks in Invercargill that have got it right, that are good examples for us to look at?
Queen's Park.
Mm-hmm. Queen's Park?
Queen's Park. If you go in towards where, round past the animal park, down towards the cafe, there. It's not bad because you can straddle the middle. And it's often.
Mary, have you got any that you could add?
I don't live in Invercargill, so I'd have to rely on Tracy, but I would say, to find one that actually meets what would be accessible for everybody across the country would be a rare event. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Mary. That's 10 minutes. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy, as well.
Much. Thank you for the opportunity. Sorry for starting early.
Right. Next, we welcome Carolyn.
Kia ora.
We just get the microphone just a fraction closer.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Right, thanks. Kia ora. I just want to clarify, because I'm just checking my notice of this meeting today, which came about 3 weeks ago, and it said the first submission I was doing was on controlled parking policy. Is that correct? Because you did talk about.
We've got you down as footpath management policy, but we also have you submitting to the parking control bylaw.
Yes. So
you've got two submissions there.
Yeah, and I've got one for myself.
Correct. You've got one on behalf of the blind citizens and one by yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So which one am I doing first?
You are doing the footpath management policy on behalf of the Blind Citizens New Zealand.
Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. It's best to have the right one first. Okay, so blind people have always been concerned about access through footpaths and making sure that we are safe and that we can actually go places. And we have people that use white canes. We have people that use guide dogs. People that use white canes, it's really important that they have something that they can feel along, that they can actually maneuver along and use as a guide. And we have, most people have been taught to actually use shop fronts as the place to orientate themselves with their white canes. And that's why we've advocated that there shouldn't be any furniture or any obstacles by walls of shops and that. However, we understand that, you know, in Invercargill, you don't want people sitting out in the rain like today. If they're having a coffee outside, you know, they want to be warm and dry. So we actually acknowledge that. And one of the things that Tony and I noticed when we went to Canada over 20 years ago now was that all their cafes and restaurants outside had fences around them, and they actually made the fences really pretty, and they actually had even you could put your advertisements on the fence, or you could put your menu, put that on the fence and that, and so people could read that on the fence, and the fence would give a blind person using a white cane a guide to show them how they can get around that cafe or restaurant safely without starting to bang into chairs and tables and people and goodness knows what. I mean, the worst place for trying to manoeuvre is round by the library, where you have a couple of cafes there. In the summertime, it's bedlam. Blind people just can't get round there because it's too dangerous. It's not necessarily the cafe people, that the staff that shift the tables and chairs around. It's actually the public who use them, and they'll just leave tables and chairs all over the place. If they had a little fence area, and one of the places that do have had this, and I've seen it, is Waxio Shades. So if you go to Waxio Shades, they often had a little fence area, and they have a nice area. They're quite lucky. They've got a little sort of area outside that they have fenced in. There is also some other areas in town that have been produced that have an alcove that's out on the street. So I guess on a nice sunny day, people could use that for cafes. But it's really important that we do have no obstacles running around the shop fronts, or if they're fenced in, they'll be safe. But we don't want tables and chairs, and goodness knows pot plants or what, and people all milling around and sitting around, and blind people come running, you know, walking into them. Who's going to be dangerous? Blind people. But not only that, the other people that use that cafe could get knocked over as well, or a child. So I think you need to think about health and safety as well as access these days. The other thing about footpaths is you talk about shared footpaths, and we've always been opposed. Blind Citizens New Zealand is always opposed to that, and we're blind people speaking for ourselves, so we know exactly what that's like. You can have people on push bikes, and it's ironic that there's a shared footpath outside Blind Low Vision NZ building. It's always been there. I don't know why half a caution let that happen. But anyway, people come up behind your back, and they're you know, riding a bicycle. You can't hear them, and there's a lot of people with deaf blindness now. More and more people who are coming into Blind Low Vision who are elderly, or blind citizens, elderly, are deaf blind. It's really incredible the number of people. It's such an increase in that. And people who are blind and have other physical disabilities like myself now. So shared footpaths is really quite dangerous for us, unless I remember people used to have bells on their push bikes. I wish they had bells in, then they could ring their bell just before they came up to you, and you wouldn't be so frightened. It also means that guide dogs get frightened of vehicles that are using shared footpaths, because they're trained to help you and they walk in a straight line. And if somebody comes up, especially high school kids, and they come up and they come so close to you, the guide dog can get frightened, and then it puts the dog's work and then you know, out, and then the poor blind person is actually disadvantaged. It could be in a dangerous situation. So it's really important that guide dogs concentrate on their work, and so we just ask that shared footpaths are thought about. And if you do, you know, putting a painted line down the middle isn't going to help blind people. If you're going to do a shared footpath, put a tactile indicator line down the middle, so people with white canes feel that tactile and know that they're on the correct side. And I don't know why that isn't already done outside blind low vision building, because a lot of our blind citizens members walk around, they're quite mobile, and there's nothing to indicate to the blind person who's using a white cane like Vic West what side of the road what side of the footpath he's on. So surely one of those yellow tactile indicators just down the middle would be quite a cheap way of fixing a problem that does exist. I guess the other thing is we are very pleased to see in the policy about reinforcing your bylaw with regards to cars on footpaths. That is a big hassle. I understand it's a big hassle around by the rivers. Some of the streets, those narrow streets round by the rivers up north in Invercargill, a lot of cars are being parked on footpaths because there's nowhere to park them on the road because the road is so narrow. And so I know some members who live around that area saying it's very difficult and they had to walk on the road. Their guide dog is stuck in the middle of the road, narrow road, car can come whizzing by, guide dog gets frightened and stops concentrating, and so the member is quite dangerous as well. Because I know that when I had a guide dog, you had your guide dog usually on the traffic side of the road, not always, depends what side, but if the guide dog's on the traffic side of the road, they're quite vulnerable. And we certainly don't want to have guide dogs run over because they could cause, they certainly cost a lot of money. So I think that are the major issues that we want to point out around about just things about gardens, like blind people are always passengers, and so we're going to get off out of the car on the streets, where the footpath is, and in places like Clyde Street and by the library and that, there's big boxes with plants and trees and goodness knows what, and you get out and it's really hard because you can't work out where to go. If you've got a walking frame or a wheelchair or a guide dog or using your white cane, it's really sometimes hard because there's not enough room for you to get round past the garden or past the tree or whatever before you could fall in. If I fall in the tree, I'm going to end up in hospital and I'm going to get told off for falling in the tree with broken bones. So yeah, that's just the last point that I wanted to make. I'm ready for questions.
Okay, look, you've got about 30 seconds left, but because you're speaking twice later on, I think we can sneak some questions in there. So I'll accept one question, and that's from Darren.
Thanks, Carolyn. What about those venues where they have a recessed area back from the natural edge of the footpath that they're able to utilise? Is there some form of barrier that would still be appropriate along that?
The recess area is all right at the back, but you probably need something at the front, and have a little gateway or an entrance. I mean, obviously you're going to have an entrance, but you'd probably want something just so that, because people are walking on the footpath, the part that goes around is sort of going out of the footpath, so it's around. You probably need just a little fence around the front of it as well. It's to keep the furniture and the people sort of inside, just to make sure that they know their spot and the people who walk know their spot. That's all.
Thanks, Carol.
Right, thank you, Carolyn. We'll hear from you shortly. In fact, we'll just get rid of these minutes and you can actually stay there.
I could stay there, right.
Yep, you can stay there. So next on the agenda is minutes of the Infrastructural Services meeting held 2nd of August 2022. Can I have someone move that they are true and correct? Thank you, Councillor Scott. Seconded Ms Cook. I'll put that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Now we move on to the hearings for the parking control bylaw, and our first submitter is Carolyn Weston.
Hi again. This time I'll talk about, I don't have as much to say this time, so don't worry. Control parking, and I've actually been talking to some taxi drivers who have mobility vans, because I've been having to use them myself when Tony can't take me somewhere, although I can use a car. But they were very concerned about the car parks for mobility users in Invercargill. If they're driving a taxi van, they're using those car parks probably quite a lot, and they're experiencing firsthand the problems that taking a person out, you know, if you go into one of those car parks that go in on an angle, and then they had to open the door at the back, and then they let the person down or out through a ramp. Some have got ramps and some have got hoists. They let them down, and they're right on the middle of the street. So, you know, it's very dangerous. The other issue for them is that if you're people in the car, and Tony said to me the other day in town when we were parked, he says, you have to open your door wider? And I said, I do, but I'm waiting for my wheelchair to come, and then I open my door wider, but there isn't enough room. And I know Tracy has told you about that, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I do know that there's very narrow mobility car parks at the airport, because I haven't been there for a long time, but I do remember even with just a white cane or a guide dog, it was very and a walking stick, it was quite difficult even to park there. There was no room on the sides of the car, so either driver or the passenger really struggled to open your door wide. So I just think that is really important. Also, in your policy, talked about having 2 mobility parks in S Street and 2 in Don Street. I think that might sound all right for today, but we need to look at the future, and a strategic thinking governance body such as the City Council should be thinking about not today, but in 10 years' time. How many people will be disabled in Invercargill in 10 years' time, and visitors? And you'd probably be better to have 3 mobility parks now. Get them there now. Don't wait until it's too late and people don't have enough. So the other issue about parking is, of course, the oh, sorry, it's going out of my head. Oh, yeah, just to make sure that when people have mobility issues, that they can get from the road onto the footpath without having too much of an issue. Now, and people in wheelchairs need flat, but people who are using a white cane need something to indicate the difference between the road and the footpath. So it's really difficult to make sure. So consultation with CCS is fine, but you also need to consult with Blind Citizens Southland Branch, and we do have a very good relationship with Russell and Nathan and Amelie, and so it's really great. But we haven't had a talk together for about a year, so I think consultation is good. But talk to the disabled people. Don't talk to the people who work in the agencies. They can tell you what's happening at a level that they work at, like servicing, and what it's like for them to see what and observe. But it's us, we experience firsthand what disability is. And just one little last point, the government UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled Persons has been monitored by the UN in Geneva just a couple of weeks ago, and there's some good documentation just came out about how the New Zealand government has fared in that situation. Some things are okay, but there's a lot of work still to be done in that area. So I thought I'd let you know that. Thank you.
Okay, right, I'm going to open up for questions for Carolyn. Councillor Clark.
Just 2 questions through you, Chair. One for Russell to start with, who's sitting behind me. In Esk and Don Street, the parking is very time limited, isn't it? Is it just a 5-minute drop-off type thing? Is that the intent?
This street is.
That's the intent, is that the car parks in Esk and Don Street are short duration and not paid.
Correct. So Caroline Nobby Clark, just wondered how you'd feel about having more disability parking in those two streets if they're really only for drop off and pick up. They're not to sort of drop you off, stay there for a while, and you go do a bit of shopping and then come back. They're really
Okay.
open the door and drop the person in and really move on to somewhere else where there's car parking.
Yeah, well, when we had the consultation over a year ago with Russell about the inner city upgrade and everything, we talked about mobility parks and the disabled people. It was at the library, Russell, you might remember, and the disabled people were quite insistent about having parking in that area, but there was no talk at that stage of just being a drop-off area. So I think that's something that you do need to talk to the disabled community of Invercargill. So we do really need another one of those meetings, I think, just to discuss and let people know what your intentions are. I mean, maybe there must be some other areas that people can park. I know my sister only has one eye. She's had the other eye removed, and she will never be able to walk, drive her car into the car parking buildings because she's got no 3D vision. So that's an issue for her. So she has to park out on the street. So one of these things is there'll be other people that have not got 3D vision. So think about all the needs of people and what, I mean, maybe there's going to be more parking in Tay Street, for example, or Kelvin Street and D Street. I don't know, but we need to discuss this further to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because that's more important, isn't it?
And second question through you, Chair, is the issue of what's your experience around covered car parking? So how do those visually impaired deal with the H&J car park that requires moving up levels, and the same in the Invercargill central block that we've referred to as the mall? Any experience in that, or is there a preference to have street side access?
Blind people can't drive, and so they usually are going to go to a covered car park. They will go with a sighted person, so they depend on a sighted person to help us get around those areas, because they are quite dangerous. They're very dark and dingy, and you know, we're getting quite a few more of those in Invercargill. But most blind people that live by themselves actually use taxis or use the bus. So it's probably not really an issue we've discussed, but maybe it'll become an issue in the future. I guess the main issue is when you're walking along the footpath and people come out of those covered car parks in their car, and you know, there's no way of knowing unless the drivers continually toot their horns before they come onto the footpath, which I know that my husband does, but a lot of drivers don't do that, so you don't always know. And with these electric cars coming into vogue and they're silent, it could be quite dangerous for blind people. So it's an issue that we're probably going to look at the future. Oh, okay. Okay, so, or maybe if all the car parks had a wee bell, or big bell, or something, some noise that when the car comes out, that bell would ring, or the buzzer, that would indicate to a blind person that there's a car going across that part of the footpath. That would be helpful.
And she's raised a third issue for me, if I can just squeeze a question in.
Yep, no, we've got 1 minute
Good
left.
example of that sensor bell is the H&J car park. So that's as a car comes out, it generates an automatic noise. But it's been my experience that the people driving the cars just think they can zoom out over the footpath. It helps the person walking, but it doesn't necessarily help the person in the car. So yeah.
Doesn't when they're on their phone.
No, they're supposed to be. I thought that when you come out of a driveway or a car park, you're supposed to stop before you go across the footpath, because you don't know who's on the footpath, and there could be a little child or something, and you wouldn't see them. So I think that maybe that needs to be education on.
Thank you.
Okay, right, we now have time. So we have Carolyn speaking again, so Evelyn, if we want to save the question till the next one.
It's more, it was
Sorry?
about the parking meters actually, so it's probably relevant to this one.
Well, Carolyn is speaking to the parking control bylaw on behalf of the blind citizens right now.
Thank you.
So she's got another 10-minute forum. So, Chapter 2, Carolyn.
Yes.
You are now speaking on behalf of the Blind Citizens New Zealand.
And yeah, so
Right, you have
I'm
you
getting
have another.
quite confused.
No, you have
On
another
time.
10 minutes. This is your second submission.
Uh-huh.
Yep, the previous one was your independent submission.
Yep.
And
Yep.
now this is
And this is on
the parking control bylaw.
right. Thank you. So there's not much to say now, but so I guess really importantly, as I've talked about blind people and disabled people, but I'll concentrate on blind people. Parking is really important for blind people if it's, as I said, not parking on footpaths, and that's really good you're not doing that, but we are concerned that do you have the resources to actually monitor car parking on footpaths? And I know that's in the bylaw, but and you got a good intention about that, but in reality, can you actually do it? Think about that. Parking, I think there's issues about parking for blind people when there's things like sandwich boards, and that's where we want them to be, but there also needs to be an area that people know they're safe to get out in and out of cars. So there's that relationship between sandwich boards being by the gutter, which we want, but also making sure that that they're not going to impede people who are blind or any other disabled people actually who get in and out of the passenger sides of the car. Making sure, so it's just another barrier, but what we've got to do is try and reduce the barriers. That's what disabled people are doing throughout the world, is trying to reduce our barriers to take away the disabling factors of our impairments, because we actually have impairments. We don't have disabilities, we actually have impairments. The disability factor is what society's created as a barrier for us. So if you take away all the barriers, there won't be disabled people. We'll just be vision impaired or blind or hearing impaired or physically impaired people. We won't have disabled people at all. That would be the beauty of it all. But I mean, when is it ever going to happen? It won't be in our lifetime anyway. So so just looking at what is barriers and then try and to eradicate them or reduce them to an extent that they're not going to be causing so much a barrier. So I guess the major issue is thinking about when you put the car parks and when you put. I'm not quite sure why someone wants to ask me a question about parking meters. I can't even see where they are now. I knew that parking meters used to be, if you went to the front of the car, you'd find a parking, you could feel where the parking meter was, and then people put their money in, not that I even knew how, but I knew that, but now I have no idea where the parking meters are.
You've got to bloody look for it.
No, with it. And so I don't worry about parking meters. I don't have to look for them. I'm not a driver, but my husband is complaining because he doesn't know where the parking meters is, and he says, "Oh, I don't know where the parking. I can't help him. I can't see the meters." So, so I'm not quite sure what the parking meter question's about, but we just want to make sure that everyone's safe. Thank you.
Okay, right. We've got a good time. 7 minutes for questions. Evelyn.
So through you, Mr. Chair, the reason I did ask is because you made the comment about your husband saying about the parking meters. So I guess this is about your conversation about if we remove the barriers to your access to spaces, that you no longer are disabled, but you are still impaired. And that goes to people, particularly non-sighted people, needing somebody else to take them places,
Actually,
if
can
it's a vehicle.
we shouldn't have to rely on somebody taking us to places.
However, if you're in a vehicle, if you're going a distance that you can't walk or you don't want to use public transport for, so what can we do, or what are you asking of the council to do, or perhaps it's your husband that needs to answer this question, that makes the parking for people accompanying people with some physical impairment or if we're lowering the barriers, what should we be doing in terms of the parking? Because it is a parking issue. If the meters are not located properly or you can't access to pay or things like that, what should we be doing? And is there a solution that you have in mind apart from moving every single one that's just been put in?
I'll have to ask my husband about that. I just need to explain that he's just recently had a cataract operation, and he's got another cataract growing on his other eye, but he's also got some scarring tissue on the other eye as well. So he actually probably can't quite see as normal at this stage until he gets his new glasses. So I'll let him speak. Tony, you want to answer that?
Tony, if you're going to speak, can you bring the microphone close to you, please?
Not much thought's gone into the placement. I mean, you've got parking meters one end of a block. If you're parked down the other end, you've got to walk all the way down to the meter, and you might be going to a shop somewhere near where you park. So, I mean, what do? I don't bother going to the meter, I just duck into the shop. But I actually think Ian, I think it is, and Russell should make an appointment with your counterparts in Dunedin and have a look at what they've done there. When you park, they've got so many parks to a metre, and when you get out of your car and walk to the curb, there's an arrow saying which way to the metre. Now, I struck that problem in Space Street. I got out the car and there's one there. Which one do I go to? Probably went to the wrong one, but I think it'd be a good idea for you to go up to Dunedin and have a look and get some more meters and put them in the correct places and have so many parks to a metre.
And have painted arrows on the...
And I've actually found one block around town where there is no meter. And I don't think you're supposed to cross the road to a meter.
So that's his request. Just one thing too about the parking meters. Last Wednesday I was in town with my alternative care support worker, and she was struggling to work out how to actually work the meter. And I said, "Oh, don't they have any instructions on the meter?" And she said she didn't really know, but she took quite a while, and I was sitting in the chair waiting for her to sort out how she worked out a meter. And I said, "Have you paid?" And she said, "Well, I don't know if it's gone or not. I'm not sure if it worked or not." So yes, there might be some training involved. You might need to have some workshops, public workshops on how to work those meters.
Right, we've still got a couple of minutes.
Car parks.
No, you're most welcome to speak, Tony.
Don't?
Yep.
Easy as you can.
Yeah. I was going to say, with the car parks, you've got parking signs. Like if this was the car park, you've got a parking sign here, so the passenger can't open the passenger's door and get out, so you can't park there, or you've got to move. And I think those signs should be put between the two parks. Put them between the two parks, so if you've got a passenger, they can open the door without having to bang onto the pole.
Right. Further questions? We've still got a couple of minutes. No? Well, that's...
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony and Carolyn. Right, we have one further submitter for the parking control bylaw, and that is Terry Gibson. Terry, welcome.
Kia ora everybody, Terry Gibson's the name.
Oh, just bring the microphone a wee bit closer, thanks.
Right?
Yep, good.
Sweet. What do I do?
Oh,
sorry,
right.
I'm not sure.
Oh, no.
First
sorry.
time.
Yeah, sorry, 10 minutes you have, so if you want some questions asked, say speak for 5 or 6 and you get 4 minutes worth of questions. So, or you can speak for 10 and use the whole lot.
Well, I'm just because I live down Kew Road, and there's a lot of all of a sudden, I've been there for over 5 years, and they decided to get someone to come down and start putting tickets on everyone's cars. There's 19 minutes. I'm there, living there, and I parked my car out, and it was me that got the ticket. So I did write in and ask for it to be got rid of, which they were kind enough to do. But residents, most of those houses down that road are owned by the hospital anyway. So the very few residents that are there, I know that there's going to be a new subdivision going in there, so there might be more people that be using, that be using that road. Do we actually need those signs there, the 90 minutes? Because I've been speaking to this gentleman over here, Russell, down at South City, and they said it was put in there quite a long time ago. The nurses do use it because they've got CCTV cameras out the front. I've been speaking to some of the nurses, and they said safety reasons is why they want to park out there. The only reason why it started to get quite congested at the time was due to the back of the hospital doors being closed. So most people used to go through the back end to get into the hospital. And so that's why it became quite congested out on Kew Road. Now the doors are open, we don't have the same problem. So do we really need those 90-minute signs? Can someone answer me?
Right, okay. We can't give you answers on this. This is like a public forum. You can speak, we can ask you questions. This will come out when we do the deliberations on those.
The suggestion is too, it's like how like in Dunedin and places like that, if you live in an area where there is a limited length of time, is that the people can actually get something to go in their car. And so that's what my suggestion was, is that we just get, if you live there, residential. And the other thing was because I felt that the whoever was ticketing was quite unfair because they just did a select part of the street, because a friend lives down the other end. Her cars were parked exactly the same length of time as mine, under 90 minutes, and she never got a ticket. So, you've got to be fair when you are distributing these things out. Yeah, all of a sudden there's not as many nurses parking out there. But one thing that they did say, because they've had the car break-ins in the car parks, especially sometimes when they go in, if they've come into a shift that's earlier than normal, they want to come out and feel safe when they're walking to their cars. So I usually get the nurses do come out on their shifts, but they feel safer coming out to the side where they can be watched by CCTV basically, a lot clearer. And Mr. Russell did say that that's probably a hospital thing, but still our nurses work in our community and we need to keep them safe no matter what, male or female.
Right, okay. So what we're going to do now is we can open up for questions. Do we have questions for Terry? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair. Terry, you mentioned in your submission that a lot of the time the houses owned by the hospital are not occupied. Is that a common thing?
Yeah.
They're just empty houses and they're not parking there. The reason I ask is if you think they take away the 90-minute parking, would they not be parking there all day, for example, and then you wouldn't get the chance of any parks?
No, because sorry, can you repeat your question? Thank you.
Basically,
can you speak into your microphone because I can't hear you?
Thank you. I'm trying to ask the question in a way that would allow for people that were living in the houses, be they hospital employees or not, if they're parking there all day, and then if they were parking there all day. At the moment, if there's 90-minute parking, the parks would come free every so often.
No, it's not, because the residential that go in there are usually doctors that come over from every now and then, like they might have come down from Hamilton for a 3-month stint and things like that. So those are most of the ones but there's going to be new subdivision put down our area, so they might have people that are visiting them and they might be staying overnight. It's just that, we're not sure when we're going to get a ticket, and like in 5 years there's been nothing. And that's how long I've been living there. And people like I asked my neighbour next door, Leslie Hyde, she said they've never seen anyone come down there either. So it's one person's made a complaint. So that's the reason why they started to go, we need to get these tickets handed out. Then, yeah.
Thank you for that
Yeah.
clarification.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just seems to me that you've got three sets of people competing for the same car parks. Hospital workers who prefer to use the street as opposed to the car parks around the back, which at night can be pretty scary places. Visitors who might be in the hospital for what they think is an hour or two and could be there all day.
Yep.
And residents who could be the hospital staff who are living in that area as well, in those houses. So I guess for us, what's the priority?
Well,
The control thing you can then put in things to control.
but there's really, like, I mean, I don't mind. I live next to the hospital and I come from Auckland, and, you know, trying to get car park around Auckland Hospital is dynamic. You know, it's I think with it, if we don't actually need them, to be quite honest, I don't see the purpose of them being there. I can understand why, like a lot of people, they walk across, the nurses, especially from there to the emergency area, or they work front of house. So they're the ones that generally park out our side that I've seen, because I see them all the time. I'm not worried about it, but the residential ones, when you say about the hospital staff that live in the houses, they've got quite a bit of car parking off their on their sections anyway. So, and they use the actual work cars as well. So they usually just go and get the work cars because they've all got their numbers on it. So I know that they hardly use the work cars. If they need it, they're available to them.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions? No, that's excellent, Terry. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Did you answer my question? Oh, you can't answer it. Sorry. Apologies.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is we've got the Kew Road and Ness Street are coming up in deliberations, and we'll be deciding on the outcome of the strategic parking bylaw for those.
So is what I suggested, like I said, regarding even just to take like something for the people who are down that road, would that be taken into consideration?
That is a consideration, that people who live there do not have exemptions. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Made a note of it, and it'll be raised as a
Heard what
question.
you said.
Thank you.
Yep.
Kia ora.
Yep.
You're
Thank
right.
you. Right. Okay. That takes us to the parking control law deliberations. And right, Russell, your name's been bandied about quite a bit today.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. We'll take the report as read. The only points I'd like to highlight is, hey, it's obvious that some of the proposed measures were not popular with those who submitted. When you see the numbers of those who were opposed or recommended amendments to it, I'd like to sort of highlight that some people may have potentially missed what the context was. So, for example, 4th Street was talked about a lot, but outside of SIT and so forth, and it's only one section of 4th Street was actually being proposed. So some may have misunderstood the intent of what was being consulted on. The 4th Street metering and parking in hospital were the 2 points of the consultation that were most discussed, and there wasn't a lot of feedback made on the other parts that were consulted on within the bylaw itself. I'll pass over to Russell if he's got any points he wants to highlight at this time.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure there'll be a few questions that will relate to some of the discussion, but what we've tried to do with the options is actually narrow the many options down for both 4th Street and for Kew Road, with the desire to actually make it reasonably clear that it's predominantly either the status quo, what we've got, or what we are suggesting as a preferred option. It does mean there are other alternatives that could be considered should council wish to move in that direction. But happy to take the report and answer any questions.
Okay, I guess I'll leap in as chair and follow up with what Terry was like to ask, and that is the residents of Kew Road, should they be exempt from any parking regulations, considering they live there and not be subject to 90 minutes?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. As in the report, we've considered all of those options, and our chief executive and some of my staff had a meeting with the DHB to actually consider what they were doing on site to actually deal with their own car parking. As we know, Kew Hospital site is a huge site and got lots of parking, but I guess through the pandemic issues, they've had other security issues, so they had some doors locked. They are now addressing that. On the street, we actually have three options. We have those people who want to go and visit someone at either ED or attend someone at hospital, but you get inside and the car park's full. Or you also have the residents who actually want to park near the houses, and you've had these employees. So we've removed two of them, and the option that we're proposing is in fact to have on the south side, which is the side against the hospital, a P180 type zone. So it's a long time, so you can get there, and if you've got a extended appointment, you can be there, but it's an area where the cars will turn over during the day. And on the north side, we're proposing that just be all day parking, so the residents can handle that in front of their properties. That's the proposal that I think, excuse me, we considered whether we should have residents only parking coupons. That comes at a reasonable overhead administratively, how you manage that. Yes, it's possible. We haven't got anywhere else. I'm not sure that the advantage of actually would offset the cost to us, given that we've got a solution that we think it will actually work quite satisfactorily.
Right, the north side is no restrictions. Okay, Leslie.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify with Russell. Russell, the map on page 7 of the 9 that shows option 2 for Kew Road, it's showing Ness Street with the purple 180 parks. Is that meant to be the case? It didn't seem to quite tie in with the words to have Ness Street both sides 180.
We have had time-related parking in there, and that's also a little bit so that you don't get people who are parking and heading for home and clogging up that area, which is reasonably tight and is reasonably close to the school. So I think it's a good option to start with and see how we progress.
Right, so that one, if we went for it, could be re-looked at depending on exactly how it's then used. We haven't had a lot of Ness Street residents. I didn't notice a lot of Ness Street residents.
No, we have had no response from the Ness Street residents as being an issue.
Thank you.
Councillor Clark, then Councillor Ludlow.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just my issues are around the 4th Street one, and in particular the end nearest Clyde Street, and you've got two options in there. I just wonder whether there's a third option as well, which would be to have the north side on P90, which is what you're suggesting in one of them anyway, in option 2, but instead of having meters on the south side, to have them free. And I get a lot of feedback from people who work in and around Kmart to say that as staff they are really struggling to find car parks, and you've had that in the process where there's other businesses in that area as well that also reflect that their staff are struggling to find places over and above those that want to work in the CBD, which I think that'll decrease as the mall gets to the end of its construction. So I just wonder whether we've got an option there to the benefit of the P90 on the north side, so that it does keep people away from, as you say, from being there long term and might need to get into the disability centres and the medical centres as well.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Certainly, any of those options do work from a functional point of view. The parking kiosks that are there could be removed if that's the direction council wishes. We continue to suggest that parking in that area is still only a block away from the city centre, and it is an area once I think we've stopped constructing things that we will see more and more people wanting to park, but it certainly is an option if that's the desire.
Thank you.
Councillor Scalp? No? Oh, is it Councillor Lush, sorry?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Just as far as with your consultations with the hospital, do they intend to put in more parking for their own staff? Is that something that's on their plan?
Mr. Chair, I wasn't at the meeting, but my understanding was that they would be opening up some of the doors, checking the lighting and freeing up some of their parking for their staff, not necessarily allocating further park for people visiting or attending appointments. So I guess that is a pressure point that I would also see.
Okay, and just the other thing is, I know I got a number of contacts from people that were working there. I think it was during one of the wards was closed and the wardens had gone down there. It seemed as though it was an untimely thing. Was that overzealousness, or is there wriggle room there to perhaps enforce those zones slightly less? I mean, have we got much freeway with how we enforce that? Or can I not ask that?
Kia ora through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The enforcement team were carrying out for the first time in some time the enforcement at that time. What we will do is work with the roading team to develop a strategy for where we go when and how we manage that, as opposed to us just deciding. So it comes down to making sure that we keep vehicles moving in an appropriate manner at the various parts of the city, and we also do a lot of work around schools and other parts of the community that have a high parking turnover rate. So it was the first time in a long time we refunded all those tickets and apologised to the community, and that was a good learning for our team who were all new to that.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for the clarification. That's great.
Evelyn.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Russell. I can see the concerns that people are raising, and I can understand, but what is our purpose in planning parking? I mean, we're not doing it as a revenue operation, I hope, but we're doing it as a traffic management and liberating space for people to use. I am really concerned about an option that allows free parks on one side of the street to create, for lack of a better expression, social parking for those who need to go to age concern or those sorts of things, which I fear might become bait for people who don't want to pay for parking. And I think if we're trying to disincentivize people from, parking meter avoidance, we should be saying to people, if you insist on bringing your vehicle into the city, this is the cost of doing it, rather than saying, we're going to clap your hand and applaud you. And, is there another way of managing social access to these places than making some free parking space that I fear will not be available to those social needs clients, like a permit or something that they can swipe onto the parking meter that allows them to park there for their appointments? I just do worry about the total removal of the parking meters.
Mr. Chair, that's a really interesting and reasonably challenging question to respond to. Parking in its purpose is really to keep the cars moving around the city to give people access to those businesses. We also have one of those fortunate, I guess, advantages that you can have all-day free parking for employees in the city, 1 block away from the city centre. And I'm sort of in two minds to raise the issue that as we go forward to look at climate adaptability, we will need to consider how do we encourage people not to drive everywhere, but to look at other modes. And clearly one of the options that you will need to watch for the future is how do you pull the lever of parking, and how close do you get, and what do you want? We've considered at length about how we would best manage the parking in 4th Street, and we've gone from everything from having all-day parking and just let it happen, right through to putting meters there. And we think that to try and find a balance to work forward is actually to have the range between the time restricted car park, so people can park there and go somewhere for a short time, or if they want to stay longer they can pay for it. I think that that's the balance that would be a good position to be in for a period of time. I do think as the city centre is completed and the rest of our parking, and we look forward, we will need to think about the types of where we currently have parking and all-day parking. I think there's another wave in the future of actually addressing car parking.
So can I ask a further question?
Yeah, go, yeah.
Is one of the pressures that we're finding on that area because the bus hub is in a different location at the moment, so therefore people, I know for myself, for instance, if I want to go to Kmart, it's quite a hike from H&J Smith's. Is that one of the things that people are, because the bus hub is further away, more people from where they want to be working or living or whatever, that people are using that parking in a different way than they did before?
Mr. Chair, I don't know the complete dynamics, but I suspect some of it will be is that we have at the moment a reasonably high construction workforce, and they start relatively early, so they actually consume quite a bit of the close by parking. Wow. And that will change as those construction sites change. So I think we'll see a slight movement in that, and actually some normality come back to those regions.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Lewis.
Thanks, Chair. Russell, I don't want to blindside you here, but in the parking bylaw, 8.2, it's got the council may on application include any person residing in the vicinity of a parking space, and of course that parking space is defined earlier, grant an authorised vehicle permit for that person, entitling that person the sole right to park a vehicle in that parking space during such period and such occasions or conditions as the council may determine. Have you any ideas what probably strict criteria, would it not? Or have you any ideas what the criteria would be?
So, Mr. Chairman, that purpose of that clause is specifically in there. So should we wish to have parking permits issued, that we actually have the powers to do so. Yep. I guess my recommendation in the report is that I don't believe for Kew Road it's the right solution at this time. It could actually be around high schools or other places where we have really high congestion of parking that might actually apply better. But that's the purpose of the clause. I'm not suggesting we use it.
Thanks very much.
Russell, just a point of clarification when we do come to vote on this. Option 2 for the Kew Road Ness Street one, option 2 is silent as far as I can see on Ness. It mentions parking in option 1 for Ness, but on option 2, the outcome for Ness Street.
It's a 180. The map shows purple on both sides.
Oh yeah, it might. Yeah, okay. It shows in the map, but not in written.
That's why I asked.
I believe if we actually had provided a bigger map that I could read as well, that we would have.
So when we look at what's written for option 2, it says P180 south side, all day parking north side. I imagine that's for Kew Road, isn't it?
That's correct.
So when you look at that paragraph, that option 2, what does it say about Ness Street? Just so when we do put the motion, I just want to make sure that Ness Street.
It's not specifically mentioned, but I believe we should include it in as being the P180 on Ness Street.
Okay, that's what the map shows. No, that's okay. Rightio, Councillor Clark.
Russell, just on page 8 of the report on Board Books 51, see you're clarifying the police vehicles are only exempted for parking rules for urgent police work, and I have some concerns with that, I guess. At a time when we've got a lot of minor crime going on around the city, you'd want police to be more visible. I just think it stretches their patience to expect them to be around our community on non-urgent work, and then have to jump out and go 50 metres down the road to put in some money into a parking meter. I think that it's a stretch too far for me, so I guess I'm signalling that.
Any comment on that, Russell?
Mr. Chair, we changed that just to make sure that it was reasonably clear that when they're on appropriate police business, and we have used the word urgent. I guess if they're there for a planned or otherwise, then we could remove that and just have it for any use in a marked vehicle, but not all police vehicles are obviously marked. But I don't know of any situation where we've actually ticketed anybody in a police car, but group manager will be able to tell us. I wouldn't think so.
Okay. Councillor Soper, then Councillor Crackett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Russell, just going back to 4th Street for a moment, I notice in the conversation with age concern that there was a bit of talk about the over 80s parking exemption. and the fact that it is not well known, and the fact it would seem that Age Concern expressed a bit of surprise. How much publicity can we incorporate into whatever we decide today that advertises that over 80s parking exemption further?
I guess that's an opportunity for council to continue to promote that. It's not something new in our community. It's something that's been there for an extended period of time, and it is an opportunity for the over 80s to park on street. So that's certainly something we could raise, and certainly with Age Concern, they're now much more aware of that, and they will most likely promote it. Most people over the age of 80 who I'm aware of line up pretty quick to get a.
So can you indicate how many over 80s permits are out there already? Because it's still display in the window, is it not, for the over 80s permit?
Mr. Chair, no, we've moved on a little bit. We've got, with the new system, we're able to record the licence plate, and I guess we're still working, and Group Manager Trudy might be able to tell me how many, and my recollection is there's about 300 permits. Well, there were, but once again, a number of people will have the permit issued. It is for a 2-year period, but if they cease to have a driver's licence or are unable to drive, then their permit should be rescinded, but it's reliant on them actually coming into council and returning it. So
that is a fairly low number for our population. Thank you.
Councillor Crackett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got a couple of random questions, I think, somewhat. Some other places across the country, we have the provision, or the council has provided for individuals to obtain licences to occupy car parks for an extended period. And I know that in our fees and charges we have, it's $15 a day if you wish to hire out the park. Is there any kind of plan for licensing or something like that, or hiring out the parks on a longer term basis to put up things such as pocket parks or e-scooter stands or bike stands, such as the ones really similar to the ones that you know what I'm talking about, Russell? You've seen them before.
Mr. Chair, I guess there's two elements to that, is that we haven't necessarily encouraged people to lease on a long term a council on-street park for a commercial activity. We provide car parking on the street, and we don't necessarily, we control that. The decision to make to withdraw that car park to use for other facilities for our community is something that rests with council, and we can do so, and I guess we remove those car parks and actually change them into whatever we want, whenever we want. And it's reasonably straightforward, and we don't necessarily charge ourselves. However, we used to have meter bags, but of course we don't have any meters to put the bags on anymore. So we now have a system where you can effectively pay for a paid park for a day from a commercial basis, and that person can park either outside a specific business or anywhere in the on-street parking zone. And it's priced in a way that it's not necessarily encouraging people to pay for them at all times. It's there for a commercial. It's there if the builder's doing some work and they need to park close by. I guess one of our things we continue to monitor is to make sure that's not abused by, I guess, the trade sector of the community, because it is actually in good faith that we do so. If you parked all day at a meter, which we don't encourage people by, the charge becomes quite a lot more than $15. But because of the trade type activity that's supporting the business for a short time, we actually have set it at that price at this time.
So can I continue?
Yeah.
So is that being somewhat prohibitive of activity like that? So if we were to decide that it would be fantastic, or somebody in the city was to decide it would be fantastic to bring e-scooters here, and they set up some charging stations or docking stations on trailers and not wanted to hire out a park for a long-term period, perhaps they move them around town, or it's a bike stand, it's a community activation project. There's lots of benefits to those things. So does this mean that that's too prohibitive for people to undertake
I
activities
would
like that?
I would suggest that if someone came along and wanted to put an e-scooter stand that had a charging and had advertising on it and those things, and all those things we felt were appropriate, then charging them would be absolutely appropriate, and we could set, council could set a fee, whatever, how it worked through that. I guess what we've done is where it's actually been for community good and it's not been for a specific business. The last thing we want to try to have is you're allowed to park here if you've got a green scooter or a pink scooter. It's, I guess if you're there and you've got a bike stand, you're allowed to park your bike no matter where you bought your bike from. So I guess from that perspective going forward, I think there are some of the future challenges that we could have if and when e-scooters arrive in our city.
And sorry to continue that, a similar sort of thing could apply with the car park long-term leasing if that you wanted to use that as the extension of your footpath. And I know we're obviously treating the the footpath stuff this afternoon as well. So if you had, you know, a clear walkway, but then you wanted to put seating or extend your outdoor area for cafe and that kind of thing by taking up a couple of those car parks with the appropriate barriers, etc., are we stopping that from happening?
I believe you're heading in the right direction by saying as if that if we have a footpath that's not that doesn't meet all the requirements for a disability sector, and you can't fit the tables in the right place, and they want to consume some car parks, then that would be a consideration council might want to take, and they might take it as a balance. They might say, is there a community benefit here, or is it all commercial? If it's an all commercial, then you can make a commercial decision about the use of the car park, and the bylaw does permit that. That's I guess setting a new fee. But all those things are capable, and I think they are the forward-looking piece of where we want to do that, because as we get onto the footpath, it's about setting some rules that we can actually balance the community's desires and needs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Councillor Arnold, then Councillor Clark.
Oh, yeah, I've got a couple of questions, Russell. Have you noticed a decrease in actual people parking in this area, or this is a proposal, isn't it? Or are the meters there now? I honestly haven't looked.
Mr. Chair, certainly
in 4th Street, I'm looking at page 6 of 9 of Board Book.
Yep, certainly in 4th Street and other places where we have installed the parking, the paid parking in more recent times, where people have had free parking, they have moved and changed. And I guess that's people by nature don't want to pay for car parks if they don't have to, and the way the parking is in those metered spaces, so the use of those spaces have decreased. And I guess that's what I was referring to earlier, is that I think in time, in the next, I'm thinking in the next couple of years, we do need to sit back and, once the city has the build components in place, see how that parking is moving because we've got bigger car parks now. Let's see what happens, and that's the time to readdress some of those issues and see how we can use parking as a positive for the city. But at the moment, I guess we're just trying to control these spaces and be consistent.
Do you not think, this is a question, do you not think it might be better to perhaps introduce this in the future as opposed to now, because we're probably 2 or 3 years away before the Invercargill city's finished, and all those buildings that I'm looking at in 4th Street there, they all have customer parking, so there's no parking required for people there. So you're proposing that people are going to park their car there and then walk into town, is what you're...
This was the proposal that we proposed in the last bylaw review, except that we didn't have our maps aligned, and some customers pointed out that we weren't doing it the way it should be, so hence we brought this back and got some further feedback on it.
And the other question was, I'm presuming this goes right down to Levin Street, Liddell Street. You've stopped it sort of halfway on the block there. There's parking, so this paid parks all the way down to Liddell Street?
Currently, that's the current bylaw that has that, and all we're really saying is the piece that we identified, or was identified to us, that wasn't consistent with how we had set it out, was the piece between Nith Street and Clyde Street. So the rest of the bylaw as it stands is still is unchanged and isn't proposed to change.
And my last question, uncorrect last question, is like Carolyn Weston mentioned, is there any intention to increase the number of meters in town, actually, instead of having one on a block, so you've got to walk half a block to use it? I know you can do it on your iPhone if you're, or your mobile phone if you're that way inclined, but a lot of people aren't. So is there any intention to have more a bit closer together?
We're seeing an evolving change, is that the number of people who are using the parking kiosk and the other features is actually growing in time. What we've done is we have put in, and we've got pay by plate, which means you can go to any of the kiosks on street and pay for it. So you don't have to walk away from the kiosk, away from your destination to do it. So you could walk to the destination during your 10 minutes of your free time, and then actually do it on any of the machines you come past as you walk. What we're trying to do is balance the. I guess it's a cost efficiency thing. It's about how many do you put in, where do you put them in, against. They're not inexpensive. They have at times have been subject to vandalism. So it's just trying to find a balance of the right place and the right. And we have used the experience of our provider who nationally do this. We think we've got them right. I guess it's a learning curve. We're only reasonably early in the life of these products. So I think I'm quite comfortable. There are places where it doesn't look as obvious. But I guess my experience will be is, what do you guys see when you go to a different town? And if you go to Christchurch, you see an empty park, you park your car, and then you're looking to decide what you've got to do here. I think the people are getting out of the habit now of saying every park had a parking meter. So we're sort of changing a little bit. So
but instead of half a block though, but I'm just thinking if you just had free parking on 4th Street there again, you could actually just free up 6 parking meters there to put around town.
Some of the things is that you are walking to a destination, and these are typically in the direction of your destination. So we've thought quite a lot about where people are going and how to actually make sure when you're walking there, you actually are getting close to one. We're quite comfortable with the number we've got out there, which is 80 kiosks, which is just a similar ratio across the country.
You've got 6 here on 4th Street.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Russell.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, Russell. Just in relation to e-bikes, I think Alex raised some issues around that. We don't seem to be accommodating the parking of e-bikes in town. We're going to great lengths about cars and other vehicles. And I've raised this before, and I just wonder where we tied in, whether it's part of this bylaw, which talks about cycle lanes, and we've got some overarching desires to encourage people to walk or bike into the inner city area, but there's no safe place to park your bike up. And so, a good example is most e-bikes range between $3,000 and $10,000 worth, and most people that ride e-bikes, and I'm one of them, would not bring their bike into town and tie it to a lamppost or something similar, because it could be stolen. So the CCTV is an issue, but we don't want them with the narrowing of footpaths or some of the accessibility issues that we had people submitting on before, to be congesting bikes being tied to poles, and we just seem to have nothing.
Councillor Clark has raised a really interesting question, and there are 2 projects that are currently, the ICL development, the city block development, does have a specific area for a lock-up cycle park, and we as council have the opportunity to actually build, with some ECA funding, a lock-up e-bike facility, and we're still negotiating with H&J Smiths to actually build it inside there, specifically, as Councillor Clark points out, so that you can have, I guess, greater security, and I guess that leads on to how do we make safer places if we want people to cycle, and that will be the next wave of suggestion, and it's certainly not something that's missed in our city centre, but we've got to find the right location that's covered, secure, all of those things that will actually encourage people to bring their $5,000 bike to town.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sava.
Yeah, Russell, just one last question on option 2 for 4th Street. So you're suggesting park 90. What was the reasoning for the choice, 90 rather than 120?
90 minutes was seen to be a reasonable time that people could effectively walk to and from city centre and shop for an hour or thereabouts. It also gives the enforcement team, I guess it's about them returning in those timeframes too, and our P90 was thought to be probably the right balance between P60 was too short and we thought P120 was probably too long. So it was just really an experience and observation that we felt was probably about the right place to be in.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Just one quick clarification on that. I thought I read somewhere that Age Concern thought that the P90 was a little bit short for their clients. That people go in for midday meals and to socialise as well. Did I pick that up wrong?
If they're over 80, it won't cost them a thing.
Sorry?
If they're over 80, it won't cost them anything.
Yeah, but there's people under 80 that go there too, as well.
I think that you'll find that it's probably about the right time, because they typically, it's about an hour and a half. That's the time they normally are there for. So we can confer if that was, and in the future, if that's a problem, we could extend it.
So if they were there longer for some reason, so they have the meal and they socialise, are we now asking those people to go out and pick up their car somewhere and flick it somewhere else? Is that the option? That
a P90 park means you're supposed to only park there 90 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
Councillor Kett.
Yeah, I just want to throw a bit of light on Age Concern. They have midday meals, but in the afternoon, sometimes they play bowls or have a concert, housey, etc. So 90 minutes would be a bit short, very short indeed, because maybe you should be talking about 240 minutes.
All those options are possible, but equally the parks aren't specifically and only designed for Age Concern. They are there for the community to use. It could well be the case that if there's lots of people, it's not a guaranteed park if you're attending Age Concern. It is actually a free park for people to park for 90 minutes. It's a similar time that we have free parking on the roof of the Leven Street car park.
Okay, Councillor Sober.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just thought it might help people if I suggested when it comes time to moving the recommendations that I might ask you if we are going to move option 2, that the 90 is changed to 120, just to test the mood of the meeting. My own feeling is, when I consider the reasoning behind that suggestion, that 120 would be a more reasonable usage for the people we're talking about.
Yeah, I intend to break those up, so that would be an opportunity. So yeah, I think we've there enough deliberation there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move recommendations 1 through to 5 to get those out of the road. So do I have a seconder for that, if that's okay with everyone? Councillor Skelp, put that motion. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Against. That takes us now to recommendation 6. Now we've got 2 options here. So what I'll do first is we're going to do the 4th Street one, which Councillor Soper raised. So option 1 for 4th Street is meter parking on north and south side versus option 2, which is north side currently at P90 and south side as being zone 1 meter parks. So right, Councillor Soper.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I would be prepared to move option 2 for 4th Street, but replacing the 90 with 120.
Right, do I have a seconder for that?
Side.
So, Ms. Cook, you're seconding that? Okay. Right, so we're going to, Councillor Clark.
Chair, could I suggest an option 3 as well, which is the north side at 120, which is what my colleague suggested, and free car parking on the south side, as opposed to meters.
Well, at the moment we have...
It's contrary to the motion.
Yeah, yeah. So, what I'm going to do is, okay, we've got that on the floor, Councillor Soper's. So, I'm actually going to go now to the Q Nest Street one and get a motion for either option 1 or 2, whatever. So, Councillor Soper again.
Prepared to move option 2.
As it sits.
As it sits.
Okay, I have a seconder for that. Councillor Clark. Right. As far as the modification of the first one, the clarification for Councillor Soper raised was that she's just altered the time of P90 to 120.
For the north side.
yeah, how the Councillor Clark wanted to alter the south side to free parking.
Yep.
Okay, well that is actually not contradictory to what Councillor Soper does, so I can also, it's not, because that's just talking about the south side. Okay, so with clarification through you, I'd like to include. Sorry?
Would you not have to separate it, Mr. Chair, because they are two separate motions?
They are, so there would be, yeah, how do we deal with this? Because we're actually altering the south side and the north side from two different people. Yeah. So I'm going to put these separately, so those who are opposed, I need a seconder for Councillor Clark's motion, please. Councillor Arnold, okay, so I'm going to put these separately.
Mr. Chair, the difficulty you'll run into there is that my motion altered the north side but left the south side alone. If my motion is voted for, there would be some problem in putting.
Yeah, I see that. So what I'm going to do.
Mine would need to be voted down altogether.
Yeah. I'm just looking at separating south side and north side. God, you guys are great to me. Yeah, sorry,
Chair, can I
Councillor
suggest to you that you put Councillor Soper's recommendation, and people know that there's an alternative recommendation now, and if that's defeated, then we've got another option to go to.
Okay,
and if it's
right.
accepted, then that's the way.
Yeah, no, we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is put those recommendations. So Councillor Soper has for the 4th Street one is just altered the north side P120 and has gone for an unaltered option 2 for the Q Road Nest Street. So I'm going to put that motion as it sits on the screen. All those in favour?
Aye.
Yeah, I'm going to support that. So count of hands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is passed.
I vote recorded against it because I don't feel it's enough parking time for the elderly outside.
For the 120.
Yep, it's
okay.
not.
Right, we
Definitely
can call
not.
a division, and if you note, and you want the reason recorded?
Yeah, like as I said, they
No, I just, so it's not a matter of debating it. You want the reason?
Yes, I do.
or the
Please,
time.
yes, I
Yeah,
do.
No,
Yes.
that's fine. Yeah. And then Councillor Clark.
And I'll have mine recorded against as well.
Yep, for the reason of the
free car.
Yeah, if we can just note the reasons, it actually provides clarity later on.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, guys. Okay, we're a 10th of the way through, so we're on the way. So, the Chief Executive, acting, has suggested 5 p.m. break. So looking at what's next off the clock is we have the cemeteries and crematorium bylaw, which I think we could do. Okay, right. Who wishes to? Oh, here we go. Oh, that was quick. Okay, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I'll take the report, this one as read. The consultation was light on this bylaw, however, that was not unexpected. I'd like to note that we did some solid pre-engagement with the funeral directors and monumental masons, and during that pre-engagement they gave us some good feedback, and we used that to help make some changes. So we went out for consultation. We weren't expecting to be a lot of feedback come back our way. Fundamentally, little has changed from what we currently do now to what we're proposing. It's just more of a structural change within the documents itself. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Anything from you, Caroline?
No, I would just reiterate the engagement that we did with the funeral directors. We held quarterly meetings with them as a group. We did them pre-writing the guidelines and then post-writing the guidelines, so they had the opportunity to feedback, and then we asked them to submit, and those that did submitted in favour. So we feel like we gave good consultation and discussion with them on this in their setting.
Okay.
Chair, I'm happy to remove the 4 recommendations. I think the pre-engagement has made a difference, and as Carolyn just said, the submissions that we've received are in support.
I would second that. So before we put the motion, Councillor Crackett, you had you were waving.
They're going to say something similar to Councillor Ludlow. I think that the fact that we don't have very many submissions in this instance is a good thing.
Councillor Clark.
Just some clarification. In the part that talks about the requirements to have monumental work approved, I just wanted to know how wide that is. Like if you think about Sam Cusack, who's got a headstone, and it's quite unique. It's made out of glass, and it's at the time was probably quite a one-off. Is that restricted under these bylaws, or would when the Monumental Masons Association or somebody approved by them have some reservations about that?
Through you, Chair, there is a New Zealand standard for headstones and cemetery monuments. So any structure, any installation has to adhere to that anyway, however it's designed, and the installation just ensures that it's installed safely.
Okay.
So they have to meet the standard, and then we're saying we'd like it to be installed safely.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Sapper.
No, that's fine.
You're right. Okay, with that, we've had it moved and seconded. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
That is carried. Right, I think before 5 we can squeeze in the reshaping streets regulatory changes, and then what that will do is bring us fresh into the footpath management policy. So, right. Russell, do you want to lead in? Or Leslie?
I'll start.
Okay.
Thanks, councillors. This is really an information paper to actually, I guess, highlight that there are some changes being proposed by Whakatahi, of which we wish to respond to their question, I guess, their survey by the 19th, which is this Friday. It's really looking to actually free up, I guess, our hands a little bit to actually be able to do some of the things Councillor Crackett talked about earlier, about being able to use the streets in a bit more of a friendly way. At the moment, we often find when people want to have a street party or something in their area that we've got to go through a temporary road closing type process, which is a bit drawn and extended, and this gives us this is planned to give us a lot more tools to be able to do that. So that's really what the driver of the fundamental of the regulatory changes are, and the second part is really just to highlight that the temporary traffic management process, which is that which you see all the orange cones around town, is actually fundamentally it isn't changing, but it's changing its focus to be much more closely aligned to the Health and Safety Act, so from a risk basis. In essence, we are saying that there's no change to what people need to do, but we're actually asking all those people who do things on our road to actually meet the standard they should be currently meeting. So there is a little bit of a step up. It's placing a bit more reliance on people to think about a risk process. And I guess this paper just tries to bring that to your attention so you're aware of whether, I guess, that shift is occurring across the community to encourage people to use our streets for just more than cars. Questions?
Any questions, Russell? Yes, Councillor Clark.
Two issues. First, on page 2 of the report, it beggars belief why we continue to support a Whakatahi commitment to Road Zero by whatever it is, 2040, 2050. I mean, so long as we've got cars on the roads, we're always going to have accidents and we're always going to have deaths. It would be a far better vision, I guess, to have a reduction in the amount of harm we have on the roads, as opposed to having a result that nobody actually thinks that they're going to get to. But the other issue for me is the issue of traffic management, and I've heard from park staff that it's hard to do a lot of the work that we do around the inner city because we need to get traffic management contractors to do that traffic management side of it. And I said, well, you know, why don't we do our own? And the response back from some of the management was, well, actually we do train people up, but then traffic management people go and poach our staff because they pay way more. And I just wonder that going forward in the next 6 months or so, whether we give some thought internally about how we can train up our own people internally and retain them without losing them, and that might be, there may be some pay increases for that motion, because it allows us to then manage our work. Because one of the managers told me recently that you can plan to do some work on one of the roads, and you get the traffic management booked, and it takes a month to get something ready to go, and then it pours with rain, and then you're another month before you get the opportunity again. So I just wonder internally whether there's some ability for us to train and retain more importantly. So just an idea.
No, valid point. Councillor Adelaide, no,
No, it's fine, thanks.
Yeah, you raised a good point, because basically you've got to signify that there's work ahead, and you see that.
Yeah.
And then you provide clear cone settings to avoid people getting near you. Now, it would make sense that our very busy parks team should be able to do that on their own, you know, and obviously you've got to, if you have to file notification that's happening or whatever, they can do that. And it seems very double-handed and OTT that we've got to get, you know, sort of separate, especially for run-of-the-mill stuff. Different if you're perhaps chopping down trees that are going to fall on a Kelvin Street house. It might be a bit different. But, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Councillor Adler.
Yeah, just wonder if there's a bit of a difference in the roles though between compliance, which is what the parking staff are doing, and STMP work, which is something that requires a qualification.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think it's a valid issue that we're going to face in many areas where we're facing competition from the private sector.
So that qualification you're talking about, which is about, you know, real, the people in the parks team, would they gain those qualifications by whatever they
parks
need to
or
do?
parking?
No, it's parks I'm talking about, not parking.
Sorry.
So this is parks doing their work around.
So, Mr. Chairman, there's a couple of things here. Part of my team manage the corridor, and part of our role is to actually manage the corridor safely. So part of our role is to actually receive information from outside parties, whether they be for projects that council are running or projects that anyone else is running, which include our parks colleagues, and make sure they meet a reasonable standard, and then monitor that. So that's what we would call a traffic management controller. So that's our TMC roles. Any business suffers the same, that sometimes some of your best people who get trained to do specific tasks become more valuable to others. And I guess traffic management is just one of those areas where there is a skill shortage. It's just one of those areas where some people are really good at doing it. And it is certainly an area we were asking more focus about being safe on the roads. I guess that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to make sure that the roads are safe. And probably for a long time, the country as a whole has demonstrated that there have been a number of deaths, and therefore the work sites aren't safe. So this is just in alignment with the Health and Safety Act. In a similar nature, I'm sure if you've had your roof painted or your roof replaced, 20 years ago, they might have just stood on your roof and not worried about it. Now you pay for scaffolding, now you pay for the whole 10 yards. This is just another one of those situations where we've identified some risks. And ideally, I guess we would like to retain all of our skilled staff that we train every time, anytime, but the market forces do prevail. So,
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, just reinforcing what you said before, Chair, about the desire to have that skill internally. Some time ago, I asked our Chief Executive at a meeting why we don't have a lot of coloured plants in the little wee strips that go down the middle of the roads, and she quite rightly said, well, it's not as easy to maintain them once you put them in, because traffic management, you just can't go along and weed them anymore. You've got to have cones out, and as Russell says, does the safety things. So the retention is not a matter of keeping qualified staff, it's what we pay them. And if we need to pay 2 or 3 or whatever, it needs to be X amount of dollars more than we traditionally have, so that we have better flexibility in managing the inner city stuff that we need to manage.
It's food for thought. I've got one last question before I get someone to move this, and that is, with all this traffic management out and about, I'm seeing it's all nicely laid out, but there's no one working. Now, that's a frustrating thing that I've had a lot of feedback about. The roads are shut down, residents only, everything's like, it's a nightmare, yet there is no one working. So are people allowed to put that sort of all that blockage out there and not do anything at the time, and just say, I'll just come along whenever I want to and do the work?
Mr. Chair, a relatively short answer to that question says that when they apply, they have an attended site and an unattended site. So they typically have two different layouts that they actually look for. And
There's
often,
no difference I'm talking about.
And often when they've left it out, they have done so because it's there's a feature or something, an open trench or something there that may not necessarily be always obvious. We do also try to work with them really closely to make sure that they don't impede traffic unnecessarily, as you would say, because the frustration drivers have is you drive through certainly in an open highway, a site with no one about. The next site typically you drive through, people tend to not respect, and I guess that's the big thing that we face is actually drivers actually respecting the work sites, because there are workers, they are part of our community. It's an ongoing issue that we just need to continue to work with them. No,
thank you for that. Okay, right. Can I have, we've got two recommendations here: that the report be received and that the transport team complete the consultation survey for the Ministry of Transport. Oh, sorry.
No,
you don't know, right out. Okay. Ministry of Transport reshaping street regulatory changes and submit this by the 19th September this year. That's going to be moved by Evelyn and second by Leslie. I'll put that motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Right, I'm going to adjourn the meeting for a break. Okay.
Well done.
Okay, we're underway now. Look, we're going to I'm going to rejiggle the agenda because we have Mr. Green here, and he was featuring in the activities report, and rather than have him wait, I'm going to jump to the activities report, and we'll get on with that now. So, first item in the activities report is from Leisure and Recreation. Who would like to speak to that?
Yeah, kia ora. I'll just quickly touch on Parks and Recreation, and Richard can talk about the aquatic services. Sorry, Richard. So probably the only key point to note there is around the engagement that council staff are currently leading around the Sandy Point master planning. What we've noted in the activity report already from community feedback, some really positive aspects and recognition of the value that this space has for the community. Also identifying some emerging trends, but also some concerns that the next council are going to have to deal with as we take the master planning exercise into the reserve management plan, which will occur first half of next year. But other than that, happy to take any questions on Parks and Recreation, or happy to pass straight over to Richard to talk about aquatic services.
Right, Richard, where are you?
Just over here.
There we go.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the monthly participation and visitor stats of the Splash Palace continue to trend towards a positive direction. We note that comparing, it's still really difficult to compare to the same period last year because of the inconsistencies with pandemic and everything else. We also note that in this July we did have a period of activity which was paused for maintenance as well. But on the whole, trending towards recovery and doing well at the Splash Palace. So any questions, happy to answer.
Any questions on the Splash Palace? That would take us now to infrastructure, road maintenance, operations. Russell? No, nothing to...
Michael? I think we can take the bulk of this report read, or happy to go to Russell and John.
Yeah, we'll go to City Streetscapes.
Yeah.
Okay, stage one.
So thanks, Mr. Chair. I thought it was an opportunity to, I guess, bring some further information about East and Don Street. We've been in that space for the last 12 months and have made some significant progress. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for the chair of our City Centre Governance Group to perhaps give some reflection. And I guess that's one of the advantages of having that group, is that John sees from a different lens sometimes. He's seeing from the commercial and the business side of the city. John.
Cool, thank you. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair, for rearranging the agenda. It's I thought I was going to be sitting down there listening to whatever was happening for the next hour and a half. So thank you for that. Thank you all. It's good to be back. It's been a while. So I think, really, I just want to have a little bit of informal chat. We'll just really sort of share some thoughts. I know you're busy, you've had a lot on. We don't need to take too much time. And you would have been kept up to date. Obviously, the projects are very visible, and everyone has no doubt been circulating and checking to see what the progress is almost on a daily basis. And it's certainly very heartwarming to walk down the street in those new spaces and to get the feedback, both from East Street and Don Street, that we're getting. So I think I've got a license to drive. Maybe not. We just go up one if we can. Thank you. So I really just want to cover on a reflection on what's been achieved. Just talk a little bit about master plan through to stage one. Stage two, plea for continuity. I'll explain that. And then I think some acknowledgements that are due for this project. So thank you. So master plan to stage one, streetscapes. You made a commitment to developing a master plan late 2019. We selected those consultants during lockdown in April 2020. Seems so recent, really, and yet we've done so much in that time. The master plan then was delivered and signed off February 21, so really not that long ago we had signed off the master plan, and when I think a major step there for the city, and that established the principles Stage 1 Streetscapes designed, programmed and set to be delivered March 23. And while I guess it would have been nice to have hit that initial plan of December 22, it was always ambitious. And I think if we look at 3 months over that duration of from master plan to completion of stage 1, 3 months isn't a big slippage. I think we should keep that proportional relative to the scope of what's been undertaken. The combination of that work, the lived experience of doing it, the plan all informs stage 2 design, and obviously that's well advanced, and provides that framework for adapting to changes in scope. And there's going to be changes in scope around distinction, what in the place, and potentially what you decide to do finally on Esk and Kelvin. So, but the framework is there, the thought process is there. There's a lot to, and a lot of the work has been done. I think it's appropriate to think about the report card of how we've done. So we've got some quality outcomes, and that really was the goal. Right from the outset, we drew, I guess, from previous projects that were really meant to be planning and really became beautification. This is different, and I think that the team have delivered on that. There are quality outcomes that is well on its way to developing this number one goal of an aspirational environment that improves pride in the city. And I think, you know, it'd be interesting if anyone wants to debate that, but I think that that was very clearly in our minds, and I think we're well on the way to that. The big story, I think, from a governance group perspective of what has come out of the last couple of years of development is the degree of collaboration between all of the projects. One of the things we set out to achieve was for the public to perceive one big project, and that again I think has been delivered on. That really the public are, you know, of the mind that ICL, the streets, even the hotel under ILT, and then the Richardson Tower is one big project that is rejuvenating the inner city. The way that those projects have worked together, the fact that people have played well together, and it has happened, is a great reflection on all the people that have been involved. So to me, collaboration is one of the major wins out of this series of projects. Connectivity, it's one of the things Russell and I talk about a lot, is the connectivity between all of the different parts. We think is probably as good as it's been. It is probably a big improvement on previous projects. The community are connected to it, the different players are connected to it, and so far that is not really proven to have, you know, there be any issues around that. So again, I think a good win for all of the people concerned. And the other big one that you've heard me talk about here quite a bit was this needed to be a catalyst for private investment. Council cannot do this on its own. It needs the private investors to come to the party. And I'm pretty confident from what we're seeing and what we're hearing, and it will take time, that is going to happen. And I think, again, that's a major win on this report card. So I think in the main, it's all pretty good. Stage 2, and I know there are differing points of view, but I'm going to make a plea for continuity. Stage 1 takes us a long way to where we wanted to go as an inner city. We're not done, and it can't be the end of this program. Without going on to stage 2, we will never realise the full benefits of stage 1. So from my point of view, that really is a no-brainer. It's critical to the process that there's continuity of resources to keep it alive, to keep one handwriting. It's really important that we don't allow the resources that have been assembled to sort of just fall away from us, and that we end up sort of bringing in new teams of people who all want to bring in new ideas, which is great in itself, but what we will do is lose the handwriting. And that's really important, because one of the things we're trying to do here is build a brand for the inner city. And if we keep on changing the handwriting, we don't get this continuity of design intent, of finishes, of tradesmanship, and all of the work that goes into bringing this together, we will not achieve that. And I think we have to be quite hard-nosed about that, is if you want to realise the full benefits of the investment, you have to deliver a finished, cohesive product. Doesn't matter what business you're in. And it's really important that we don't lose the opportunity that's in front of us. it's really, I guess that was the main thing I want to come along and talk to about today. Was we have an opportunity. We've done really well. We've gone a long way, but we're not done. There's a bit to do. And as we move into a new political cycle and as new decisions to be made, what we do need is to make sure that there's some cohesiveness into what comes next. So I think it's equally important that we acknowledge the contributions that have gone in to date. I want to congratulate Council for the courage to go down the master plan route. It would have been easy not to. It seemed like a whole lot of theory. And equally, it's important that if they had the same courage to keep the master plan alive. The commitment to renewal, not compromising on quality, is something that I think is really important that, again, we congratulate you on. The project team, that's the ICC team from the staff, the consultants that have come in, the contractors, they've all worked incredibly well. And again, I think that their effort should be acknowledged. The other projects, whether it be ICL or Richardson Tower or Langlands or any other work that's going on, the infrastructure upgrades that are going on under the streets, again, we should acknowledge that again, everyone has worked very well towards the same goal. The city centre business community, most of our early conversations were about the fearfulness of what was going to happen. And everyone was concerned what was going to happen. The car parks were gone, that people couldn't park outside. Well, when you go and talk to these people, that is not the way it played out. Some of them had their best Decembers ever last Christmas. They're excited. They're starting to see the benefits that we talked about. They're starting to see the benefits of the extra car parks, starting to get the feel of what this street is going to look like. People are saying to me daily, are we really going to let the cars back in this street? And I say, if we'd pitched that at the beginning, we wouldn't have got off the ground. But, that's a really interesting movement in the community towards that. But the city centre business community have been great. I really want to single out Kirsten Harper, who has done the facilitation of between all the pieces of the project. One person has managed to open doors and keep everyone moving with the support of Russell and his team. So again, that collaboration with Great South and through that involvement has been tremendous. And then just everyone else who facilitated stakeholder engagement. A lot of people working very hard to get people to see past the inconvenience and everything else. So, really just to wrap up, where we're at, governance group has got work to keep on doing. We move into activation phase with Richard and his team. We start looking towards stage 2. We're obviously anxious to get some updates on that when the time is right. But again, I just think it's good to sit back, celebrate the win, celebrate what's been achieved, be excited about it. Don't worry about the 3 months overrun. It's nothing in the program of the things to come. So that's all really, and just happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. Okay, I'm going to open up for questions. Yes, Marcus.
Yeah, thanks for that. Very encouraged by that. Just in the 2 years it's happened, ram raids and all that's come across, and I see there's a cell phone shop next to Bernie's shop. They're putting in a pop-up. Does that fit within the whole scheme? Is that something that we've worked out, or is that within keeping with the
Are we worried about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it going to ruin the look of the street?
I think there's a long way to go. There's a lot of issues around ram raids and whether you can do barriers and things, and there's what's under the street and what's under the footpath. It's another consideration for Russell and his team. Right now it's copycat, I would suggest, mostly. Yeah. We talk about it within our own business. We've thought about it for, is there a need to try and protect East Street, I guess, at each end, because you're not going to do that on a store-by-store basis. I think it's evolving. I think if it gets worse, as everyone's going to say, well, why didn't we think of that? Why didn't we do something about it? But there's a heck of a lot of work would be involved. And I think, you really got to have a little bit of lived experience of it. If it becomes a problem, we'll respond. But I think to just think you're going to do a whole lot of work, put a whole lot of bollards in as preemptive, I think would be premature.
But shops are putting in bollards.
Yeah, where they can.
And they're allowed to do that. That's fine, is it?
That's beyond my sphere, but I think one of the things you've got to think about, whose property is it on? So if they've got recessed ingos, that's one thing, but then what's under the ground, or what the proximity to the rest of the infrastructure would be an issue. So I would expect, Russell, you speak for it, but it would be on a case-by-case basis.
Mr. Chair, it certainly would be on a case-by-case basis, and we would not... we would have to work through a process if it wanted to be in the street. If they want to put on their own property, they can do so. We can't stop them.
For example, we've got them at the back of the gun shop. Yeah, because that was again on our own property from day one. Different to put them on East Street or Tay Street. Yeah.
Further questions, Councillor Scott.
Through you, Chair. John, firstly, a fantastic result so far, and the community feedback has been stunning, from the very small to the elderly, and the ratepayer have been fully behind the project, and I think that's just grown in momentum. I'm really enjoying the plea for continuity that you've come out with today, and I think it's really important that this community understands that this current council is supporting stage 2, obviously, going forward. And I would say to those that are not, and perhaps there's some campaigning going on currently around that from some of our mayoral hopefuls to stop stage 2, the community should be aware of that, because just on the points that you've made, I think it's incredibly important for the long-term development of this city that we complete the project we've started. So the media should pick up on that and make our community very aware of who is opposing, because this council has committed themselves to stage 2.
Thank you. As you know, I'm apolitical. But I guess and I appreciate the comments and the support. I guess the key here is continuity of intellectual property. Mm-hmm. And when you have changes in people, and you have, when it's all a process, and I get all that, but ultimately it's always about the people. Everyone will talk about the system. My experience, it's always about the people. So I think that's really important, that we keep the people who have been critical to this program engaged in it, and keep some continuity. And if there's compromise, well, at the end of the day, there'll be decisions made. But what we don't want to do is compromise quality. And again, this is where I come back to, we set out to create a quality product. We believe we've delivered a quality product. Let's not enter the world of compromise.
Councillor Clark.
Well, John, I guess he's the person I'm talking about. So my view of the world in stage 2 is, going forward, if I have some influence, and that's not to say I will have, is that I have some struggle with going east on S Street. I like the concept of extending a corridor between Don and S, but I can't understand why we would want to build or design a people-friendly area that incorporates 2 large car parks, because those things seem to be in conflict. So you're quite right to assume earlier on, you said you look forward to the scoping that goes on after the next elections, and I guess I'll be part of that rethink potentially.
Yep.
Have no issue with the quality of what's been done. I think it's great, but there is some issues to be resolved there, certainly from my end, and it's not cheap politicking on my behalf.
No. Look, I understand. I appreciate your comments. I think, as we said when we presented stage 2, and again, there's time for this in the future, sure, is part of the pride, from my point of view, is civic pride, which includes creating a civic precinct.
Yep.
And if there's one part of the town that should be important, it should be the home of the council. So how you link that, and there's probably more than one way, but I think that's the thought I would leave with you, is tie the people to the city, tie the city to the people. And if you can do that, and you can find a way through whatever innovation is required, maybe there's an element of compromise, but again, don't compromise the quality.
So as a quick response to that, John, that assumption of tying the city to the council assumes that the council stays here. So my view of that is, going forward, is we don't even know what's happening to council in the next 3 years. may well be amalgamated. That's on the horizon.
Sure.
Our future may not be in this building. Could be somewhere else.
That's fair.
Yep.
But
thanks for your
I don't plan to look around corners. I just look at what's straight ahead and work with what we know. But I take that on board.
Yes, Ms. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just clarify what you're really saying, I think, but I want to understand clearly because it has some implications for us, is that in order to make the next stage marry harmoniously with the first stage, that we would really need to have the same designers, the same contractors. I want to clarify it because does that then come in conflict with our purchasing policies and strategies? And we need to understand that. I totally get what you're saying, and I applaud the fact that you as a group have raised that with us because I think it is important. The narrative, the stories that the streets are telling and the way they interlink with each other and make a harmonious relationship between the different parts of the inner city, I think is absolutely vital, and I agree with what you're saying. But as the governors, what we have to think about is our other legal liabilities, which may slightly be in conflict with that, and I don't really understand. But is that what your intention was to indicate?
I think I'm very clear of mind that continuity of the intellectual property embedded in people, not just on paper, is absolutely critical. I think, I appreciate you'll have procurement policies and the rest of it, but I also think you have a very experienced professional team on staff who can make sure that that does not compromise both the value and the competitiveness of the way that it's structured. I believe that they will more than fulfil that responsibility.
I appreciate the clarity of your answer and the tactfulness with which you delivered it.
Thank you.
But also to thank your group for making us address that issue out loud because it is important.
John, look, I have seen the details for stage 2, the concept drawings.
Yep.
But can you refresh me on the detail it goes down to for stage 2, on how much we have?
You've probably seen something more recent than I've seen, to be honest, because these guys have been working on developing that detail, doing the costings and getting more detail done, and are loath to, I guess, share it too widely until they've
No, just carrying on from the develop points that Evelyn's made, is that from the design point of view, as well, it's underway, but the other contractors who do the digging and paving and all
I don't think any of that's been
no, but where Evelyn raised develop point, when that goes out to tender, you can see the continuity of the designer if they've sort of been asked to do that next stage 2.
I'll let perhaps Russell could just give you a précis quickly of the status of the design.
Mr. Chair, Michael might be as good, but I'll perhaps start with this one.
It's going out the back line.
We are still at a concept stage, and I guess that's where the project management office is still working through that process to work with and have discussions with the current team about where that will go. So we've still got quite a lot of work to be done in that stage, and I guess part of that is that what was prepared was a concept design predominantly based around, I guess, that handwriting of the first stage, so we could understand where that would be, so that we could consult on to it, which was done through the annual plan. So there's still lots to do in that space, but there's no firmed view of how we will deliver that formally as yet.
Okay, you don't want to say anything, Michael? Okay, any more questions around what John has raised? No? Well, the recommendation is that, or any other parts of the activities report? No, so the recommendation is the Infrastructural Services Committee receives the activities report. Can I have someone move that? Thank you, Nigel. Seconded Councillor Soper. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Right.
I just had some issues that I was leaving till after John had done his presentation.
Oh, sorry, regarding the activities report.
Correct.
Oh, yes, sorry. No, sorry, I asked for that.
Just a couple of issues. I've had feedback on the speed.
Sorry, John, if you want to go.
Yeah, well, thank you for your time and for the questions. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Clark. I
It's all right.
missed your hand.
Just on the speed review signage, which is Russell's area, had a bit of feedback from Maui and from Green Hills too about the installation of signs there, and I just wanted some clarification about, did we actually get it right? Like both those small villages have said that they've got 100 speed limits running through their villages, which was, they thought, too much.
So, Mr. Chair, we adopted our new speed approach, of which the intention is that we will bring in our new speed limits on the 3rd of October. So to actually be able to do that on a specific day, we have been out there and we've put signs up. And as part of our strategy, we actually effectively have on that day have to go around and change all the signs from what the current speed is to what the new speed is. So we've got a strategy how we can deliver that on the day. So part of that is we've actually gone and put the sign up and we've now posted the speed that it's currently at. So, and there have been a few places and they are relatively small, but fortunately those areas have brought it to our attention and we've had quite active discussions with those people. And Maui is one of those where we've got a sign, and a good example would be it's right by the camp, and it says the speed sign is 100 k's. Now that doesn't make any sense at all, but the current legal speed limit in that place is 100 k's. Its future speed is 40 k's. So within 2 weeks, that with our magic wand on the Sunday night, we will suddenly transfer all those numbers to the new numbers, and all those problems will be fixed. And we've put up something like 400 signs in places because that's legally what we need to do that. And there has been a limited, but a few. And you know, it's great that the people have actually rung us and said to us, "Hey, you haven't got this right," and that conversation has occurred because their communities are recognising what it was, and when you talk to them about what it will be, they say, "Yep, that might not even be slow enough yet." And my answer to them is, "Let's just try it and then come back in the next review because that's the opportunity." So we're actually seeing some of the, I guess, the take up of what perhaps the consultation didn't necessarily get out to people. It's there, it's visual. So there's a little bit of static out there, but I actually see it as a really positive indicator that the people are starting to absorb it, and in early October we'll mysteriously change all those numbers overnight.
Excellent.
Councillor Clark,
and the other issue was the Steed Street stop bank. At Chair's meeting a couple of weeks ago, Chief Executive raised the issue about the pump station that runs on the right-hand side as you're going up. And there was some suggestion that the road to Ototara would be closed again while that work went on. So I got some clarification from Horrell, who's the chairman of Environment Southland. He said that work is not going to be done for at least 12 months and maybe longer, but there will be some road closures. Project has been delayed because of the requirement to get some fish control mechanisms that allow fish to go backwards and forwards through the pump station, and that's been extremely difficult. And he also needs to consult with the wider community because the project cost has gone from 3 to 12 million, approximately. So I just wanted to clarify that because there was some concern that we were sort of seen to be closing the road to fix it, and then 5 minutes later we're closing it again to do the pump station. But the pump station's a separate project and has been delayed beyond their control.
Should have been done at the same time.
It should have been done, but they couldn't get the fish control mechanism. That was what he told me. Had to get it made, but anyway.
Right. All good, Councillor Clark now?
Thank you.
Yep, so we've had for the activities report, we've had a mover and a seconder. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Right, that takes us back to the footpaths. There we go, footpath management policy and the guidelines. And Russell, you're still there.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The functional purpose of what this paper is to actually bring, I guess, to the community how we see the footpaths should be managed. And I guess through the public forum today, we've heard quite strongly from the disability sector, how they want to see the footpath be managed such that they can have a barrier-free access to our city. One of the things that we've had over a period of time within our bylaw actually says that you're not allowed to do anything in the road corridor without the roading manager's approval. That in itself gives me a relative degree on the appearance of actually to do whatever that is. And I guess this policy and guideline looks to actually introduce some documentation to give the community a better steer and a better guidelines to know how that operates. And that is really around how we will actually, I guess, prioritise access first and then use of the footpath thereafter. And the idea with this is the guidelines are there, but we also want to revisit the policy in a relatively short time so that once we've worked through with those businesses that don't necessarily meet it at the moment, we can actually build a transition plan. The community as a whole can give some feedback and we can bring the policy and guidelines back. I think we heard quite a number of elements of feedback in the public forum about the levels of consultation and how we've gone about it. So we've done some pre-engagement. So we went out there to talk to some of the groups. This isn't a bylaw, so and Rhiannon might want to talk about our consultation approach to this or our engagement approach. But the idea has been that so we actually have gone out there and started to talk to some of those sector groups so that we have a reasonable idea of the type of feedback that we'll have. And to be fair, some are very supportive and some are saying, well, this isn't going to work for us, our table's in the wrong place. But that's part of, I guess, part of what this guidelines actually sets, and you'll have heard today from the speakers in the public forum about the sorts of things that they see as the issue that don't necessarily always align with what everybody else wants to do on the footpath. So this gives some robust guidelines for us to work forward with the community. And we also had opportunities how that some of those things could be modified, or barriers or things that we can actually work through. So Rhiannon might want to comment on how we've gone about that pre-engagement.
Yes, just to note that Council supports the Combined Disability Network, which includes organisations like CCS that you heard from today, as well as a range of individuals. And the conversations took place with that group as part of the pre-engagement, as well as with other organisations directly affected, like retailers and hospitality outlets who'd be affected by this potential policy. So I think that those conversations have been really helpful in terms of shaping the policy, and also having heard from some of those people today in public forum shows the opportunity that those people have appreciated in terms of bringing their views forward.
Okay. All good?
Happy to answer any questions.
Right, questions, councillors. Ms Cook and then Councillor Clark.
So through to Russell, through you, Mr Chair, how many current cafe on the street licences are there?
Current active licences, we have a number of people who are using the footpath, and most don't have a current licence.
Right.
So we have got some work to do with those people. In the past there's been many that have, but over the last while we haven't necessarily had licensed of those areas. Doesn't mean to say we don't have conversations with them, but they're not necessarily licensed.
So as a result of today and the consultation that you've been doing, going forward, is part of the requirement going to be things like the some sort of barrier between the cafe space and the public walking access space as indicated, particularly with the low-sighted community and that sort of thing, in terms of the use of canes as opposed to everything else, the requirement that they have to need some sort of fixed guide as to how they navigate the footpath. So
someone who wishes to have, going forward, have a use the footpath will need to meet it, will need to follow the guidelines and meet our policy. And I would anticipate where it's where there's some I guess difference, then the ideal thing would be to have a conversation with both parties to see if there's actually a solution here. Because as part of it, we don't necessarily want to stop the vibrancy of any of those businesses, because that's what we're looking for, our city centre. But at the same time, we don't want to create barriers for people who can't use our city centre. So we'll just need to continue to work through that. And I think once people get to understand how the guidelines work, and that the policy is trying to, I guess, solve some of those problems by making it clear what everybody expects, then they won't necessarily bring things to us that they know won't actually follow that. So the answer to all those questions are there's lots of places we have to go and have hard conversations with, and we've already, Leslie's been out there and started that conversation with those, and that will be that transition. And as new I guess businesses open, all those things occur, then we'll need to just work through those and actually make sure that we get, I guess, a more positive approach going forward. It's not, I don't anticipate we want to go out there and throw everybody off the street. It's going to be, we want to work with everybody to see if we can keep our city as vibrant, because that's what we've been investing in, and we just need to make sure that we can deliver that.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Clark, then Councillor Ludlow.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Russell, just in relation to Wagner Place, does this policy apply to just the footpath that goes around the very edge on D, or given that people crisscross through it going to Lower S Street? Yes, I saw the look on your face here. And I mean, I like the policy. I think it gives a lot of flexibility for both parties, both those that want to access and those that want to increase the vibrancy. But if we are looking in the future to improving the, I guess, the ability of Wagner Place to add to vibrancy, as John Green just recently said, would this place some restraints around that?
I'll start and let Leslie finish on this one. Wagner Place is a reasonably interesting place because it's formed as part of its reserve and part of its road. So I guess we have to look at how both those policies.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the plan for Wagner Place is on the D Street edge of it, that it will be a 3 metre clearance space for pedestrians, and along the edges of the buildings in through Wagner Place it will be 2.5 metres of clearance for the buildings. But as we say, with the master planning, etc., moving forward, and a short policy time frame for review, that can all be changed.
Further to it, Mr. Chair, we've seen that we've actually had a coffee business situated in there during this construction and demonstrated that perhaps it might be some option. So I guess in the past that probably was things that we wouldn't have considered Wagner Place to be useful for. And I guess it shows that as part of our learning as a city, as we've developing, that we can survive in those spaces and it works. So I think it highlights that actually gives us some further thinking that we might need to do in those spaces.
Thank you.
Councillor Ludlow.
Thanks, Chair. I guess one of the things that this does is it pulls together several other policies that I was a part of in the past, and there was always the argument over we have signage and some difficulty with it being up against the edge of the footpath, but also around charging people for what essentially is an extension of space for their business. And we did have in an initial stage about half a dozen coffee shops around town that had that and were charged. And that, as Russell said, was something that fell by the wayside. But there shouldn't be any fear of someone who's running a temporary business having to pay for that space, because it isn't. Councillor Cricket earlier on mentioned e-bikes. If e-bikes want to set up somewhere, they've got to take leasing that space into part of their operational costs. And I really have no issue with that, particularly from, it's going to be mostly hospo that's affected. I don't know about fences. I think they can be just as much a trip hazard, but having some sort of clear delineation between where those dining areas are. We have seen opposite my office on D Street a real blur between a couple of businesses there that at some stages have taken up virtually the entire footpath, or in some cases it's the clients that have gone and shifted the furniture around. I guess, much as I love rules, I want to make sure that we still allow the flexibility that we do at that special time of year when we rumble with the sound of motorcycles, and we allow them to park up on footpaths. And it does become a bit of a hazard and a difficult time of pedestrian negotiation, but it is only for that week. And I think if we're able to take that into account, we're on the road for something that creates some control around the vibrancy that we've invested millions into.
So, Mr. Chair, part of that is that we have, in our ongoing challenges, to continue to keep the low vision part of the community well informed what's happening, just not in our city centre, but everywhere across these. And every traffic management plan we need to be able to convince or convey the information about where it is. And I think part of the use in those sort of event or activation periods is actually how we continue to engage with that group and how we can continue to inform them and keep them up to date with it.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments? We've got 4 recommendations here to receive the report, note the feedback from the pre-engagement, and approve the policy, note the policy review date, so ongoing feedback can be considered and worked through, and approve the guidelines, the footpath guidelines, and approve that the current fees and charges, the outdoor cafe seating be applied to all licences, and note that there is no current fee applicable for signage boards. And the review of any and all fees will be aligned to future annual plans. So if everyone's happy to move those as a group of 6, can I have someone move that, please? Councillor Lewis, seconded Councillor Ludlow. I'll put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? That is carried. Thank you very much for that, Russell and Leslie. Yes.
Be excused at 6:15, Mr. Chair.
Yes, you may.
Yep, thank you.
Now, Alistair, welcome you for the update on the search for the emergency water supply. It sounds like the title of a movie. Yeah.
Starring Sean Connery.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The intent of this report is just to update councillors on where we're at with our investigation. Last report was, as you said, in April. Some time has elapsed since then. In that report, we outlined the grief we had in doing the first pumping test with the failure of monitoring equipment. We've since installed permanent monitoring equipment, a much higher level of technology, and able to repeat the pumping test, and also dispel a fear that we had, couldn't answer last time, and that was that the water bearing strata that we're interested in, the Chatton Formation, 200 metres below ground level, is actually overlaid by other water bearing strata, notably, collectively they're called the Gore lignite measures, and they were the measures we used to draw water from prior to 1960. They are very poor, the upper levels are very poor quality, and we were concerned that there might be leakage from the upper levels down at the Chatton Formation, which would contaminate the good water quality that we've been able to detect so far. So I'm pleased to report that the second pump test showed that there wasn't sufficient leakage to undermine the quality of water in the Chatton Formation. So that's a good outcome. We need to do more testing, though, and unfortunately there is no dedicated budget for that testing. In this report I've said that we'll come back to council as soon as we've got the details of both where our expenditure lies in our various parts of council, to see if we can accommodate a budget and also how much that budget may be. So at that point, Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to ask any questions councillors may have.
Thanks for that. So that's good news about that contamination between the two layers. Right, Councillor Clark.
Serious questions. Alistair, in relation to the contamination issue, is that impacted by the recent drought that we've had? We had a NIWA scientist a couple of months ago gave us some impact about the drought that we had in Southland, and they said while we've now got some rain and the rivers are flowing okay, it will take 5 to 8 years for the aquas around Southland to recover. So it's not an instant rain and everything's fine and dandy. And I just wondered if there is some recovery from that, will that impact onto your testing? Will there be some potential to contaminate if there's greater water levels in that upper stratum that you refer to?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But I keep repeating this, when you're looking for anything underground, whether it be gold, oil or water, you are in effect prospecting.
Sure.
And we don't know much about this Chatton Formation at all. In fact, the only real information we have of it is what we've discovered during the course of our investigations. We've put 2 bores down, and we're looking and investing something of the order of just under 20 million in 25, 26. So we really want to get this right before we commit wholly to it. But it's looking very promising at the moment. We just need more information. And I think the consenting authority, we do need to get a consent to draw water from this. Consenting authority being Environment Southern, will require more information to be supplied or accompany any resource consent to draw water from it.
Okay. And the other question which you've sort of raised in your paper is the issue of are we looking for this water supply to be an emergency water supply, or is it something that we have more online as a source of incoming work? And I just wondered what your view was on that, because it seems to me there's some ways a bit of a penny both ways. If we do the emergency stuff, it might be a cheaper option than trying to look for it as a source of ongoing supply. But having said that, looking forward to what we know is coming, like the hydrogen plant and the salmon hatchery at Bluff, which both require fresh water, is it something that we want to develop in a more formal way than just having it as an emergency supply?
I think the further testing we do should give us a insight as to whether or not the resource is capable of being used on an everyday basis, which I think you were suggesting, rather than initially the exercise was set up to create resilience in the water supply network. We're solely dependent on one source of water, and so the concept then was just to look for a supply to help us out in times of difficulty. Since then, perhaps buoyed by the initial results we've seen from this, the idea has been floated to, well, perhaps we can use this resource for something more than just an emergency supply.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, we had Councillor Lush next.
Yeah, just if this becomes a successful water source for us, would it require storage there, or would it go to Branksholme? And could we use the existing Bluff water line? Are there any synergies there, or we need to create the whole infrastructure, take it, and then be treated? Have you got that far down how it could work?
Yes, I think it would need new infrastructure to convey water, not to Branksholme. My mindset is to take it back to our reservoir storage in the city here and distribute it from there. To do that, we would need a separate pipeline from the Bluff pipeline to do that. To give you an idea, of the Bluff pipeline is normally about 300 millimetre in diameter. The Branksholme pipelines, there's more than one, are 600. Okay. So if we're going to use a significant, what I'm trying to say is a significant volume of water, a lot more than what we supply Bluff and SBM, we need a much bigger pipe than the Bluff pipeline currently is. So we would look to create a connecting pipe from the bore field and treatment plant, because it will be treated on site at Aotearoa, back into our system, probably at our main reservoir pump station locations.
Okay, very clear, thank you. Ms. Scott.
Not wanting to ask you to go into any particular sensitive information, but in terms of the search and the geology of the site, how happy are you that extraction on a long-term basis from that particular aquifer may not collapse at a future date? In other words, how much is the depth between where you're taking the water from and what's overhead, and what is that comprised of? How much of it is substantial and how much of it is that porous thing that you were worried about? What's the depth between the two?
I can't recall exactly. I mentioned to you the formation that we're wanting to draw from is normally about 220 metres below ground level, and I think the next level up might be about 150, so you're talking about 50, 70 metres. But when you're drawing water long term, day in, day out, there is we're probably going to have to assess whether there's potential for settlement. We have to accompany any resource consent with a thing called an AEE, an assessment of environmental effects. So we have to look at all these sorts of issues, and the consenting authority will require us to do so. Not only from the point of the welfare of the resource we're drawing from, but the whole impact on the whole environment.
I only ask because I'm mindful that some of the aquifers that were used in Canterbury that everybody thought were inexhaustible started to collapse in certain places.
Well, there's all sorts of threats. It's Ceylon, you know, it's close to the coastline, saltwater intrusion, that kind of, all those things have to be an attempt to evaluate the risk, and we just don't have enough information to do all that just yet.
I appreciate your answers.
Right. Any further questions, Councillor Clark?
Just one quick one, Alistair, which I think Marcus sort of alluded to. The pipeline that goes to Bluff at the moment, it meets Bluff's needs, but if we have further needs for fresh water there, be it hydrogen or be it the hatchery for the salmon farms, is that going to require more capacity? Like, does the pipe have enough grunt in it to do that, or are we going to have to throw another pipeline down?
It doesn't have significant surplus capacity. Most of it's taken up by the milk and meat processing plant at Aotearoa, SPM. So there isn't a lot of fat left in that pipeline to send down to Bluff.
Okay, thank you.
All right, further questions? No? Okay, thank you very much, Alistair. The recommendations are we received the report on the update on the search for the water supply.
Happy to move that.
Thank you. Moved Councillor Soper, second Ms Cook. Put the motion, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against, that is carried. That moves us on now to heading further south to Bluff, and it's the road stopping and disposal of Stop Road, Lagan Street.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is part of the process that was commenced some while ago in December, and it is the actual formal element of a piece of road that has been consulted on with the community to go through the Local Government Act's requirements to actually say, let's stop this road, and then should it be agreed to be stopped, then it can be disposed of, and currently it is proposed that we, within the recommendations, that we give the approval to the Chief Executive to negotiate that disposal. Through this process, we followed the Act, which includes advising the adjacent neighbours, publicly advertising in the paper and putting signs up, and we received no feedback. We also have approached the Walking and Access Commission, which is a statutory group that actually protects access to the the coastline, and they had no objection to this. So the recommendations are put to council that this proceed.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Councillor Clark?
Yeah, I think all councillors received an email from Rodney in the last couple of days that raised some issues, so I guess I'm happy to raise those and maybe get some discussion going around it. He's raised the issue of the Bluff one, the additional piece of land in the thing, and he says that it's over an old Bluff landfill, right on the edge of an old quarry, and he worries about the safety of it. So that's the first issue. And who would council be liable if we sold off the land and there was subsequently some issues there? And the second issue that he states is that on the meeting of the 7th of December, and I'm unaware of this, that we gave an undertaking that parcel of land would go to the marketplace and not be just offered to the adjoining property owners. So whether you can help me with either of those two would be great.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess there's two elements to this. The first one is you can stop the road, and then you can actually decide what you want to do with it. It becomes a parcel when you then decide what you want to do with it. I know that our team, the guys in her team, have looked at those, and we don't believe that we have any, issues with the adjacent property. If it's sold to somebody, then they buyer beware.
Okay.
And I guess in terms of the sale, the legislation actually allows for the road that's stopped to be sold to the adjacent property. and I guess that's the process. I think part of that will actually be sure that the process of disposal meets a fair price, and we have seen an offer, but that's, I guess, a part of this is actually saying is how do we establish what a fair price for this piece of land is?
Okay, we're going to have Marcus.
Yeah, look, I'm not entirely sure how to do this. I think probably I'd like to declare a conflict of interest in this. I think it's a piece of land that I have had an offer on and had some involvement with, so I think probably it's best if I declare that and remove myself from the discussions if that's appropriate.
No,
So,
that's fine.
yeah.
Thank you for notifying that. Yes, Evelyn.
Mr. Chair, I find myself at a disadvantage. It appears that elected members have received a piece of communication that has not been shared with me. I find that very challenging when we are sitting in a public meeting discussing a matter like this, that I am not privy to whatever the concerns are, and I just want to draw that to the attention of everybody at the table. I do recognise that there are people who feel challenged by the fact that mana whenua are sitting at this table. However, that is a decision that this table made. We are privy to most things that everybody else is, and I think when it pertains to something that we are expected to make a decision on at this meeting tonight, that I should have been privy to it, as should have Ms. Coote. And I want to actually inform the Chair and the rest of the members that I am extremely unhappy about that. I think it is disrespectful.
I guess my take on it is that the email was sent by a member of the public to councillors. Now, I'm not sure about the sharing of that email, where we sit, of that. It would be up to the person. I know I've received emails that have been sent to me and maybe two other councillors. I don't pass that on to everyone. I understand where you're coming from here, and Councillor Clark has raised an issue regarding things that were raised about the land formation, the actual overlap onto the quarry and the tip, and so he's brought that to council. There was no other information that I can recall. It was just about raising exactly what Councillor Clark's done. So I'm not sure about the Privacy Act of sharing emails, what we do if we receive one, pass it on. I'm not 100% sure. It was sent by a member of the public. It wasn't a formal councillor.
Chair, excuse me, it's simple lobbying, and it's up to councillors to do what with as they can. And as you say, the relevant point was raised by Councillor Clark as a question. I don't think you've missed anything, but I do take the point that maybe the submitter lobbyer should probably bear in mind in future.
Yes, Michael.
Just speaking on behalf of the council in relation to that, any communication that does come via CE's office does get communicated to all council and mana whenua reps. This is an example of one that did not go through that channel.
So the point then remains, Mr. Chair, how much credence we can give to that, given that both the mana whenua reps have deep links into the community and could have researched the background to these particular remarks about the landfill, etc., etc. I think in order for us all to make effective decisions, we need to be sharing common information. I appreciate that Councillor Clark mentioned it, or I would have not known of its existence. However, the point is, if there are real concerns, how do we address them, given that the people who could have found out some of the answers without too much effort didn't even know of the existence of the query?
Well, if Councillor Clark hadn't have spoken, this would have gone silent and nothing would have been known. But I'll let Councillor Clark speak. You had your hand up.
Two issues, I guess, through you, Chair. Russell, how important is it that we make a decision on this today?
I guess, Mr. Chair, this is a process that started in December, and obviously the process was initiated by the adjacent property owner with an interest. It's taken us a period of time to get there. It could rest. I guess the process of us consulting and out into the public during that formal period, which the legislation requires us to do, we received no public feedback during that period. So,
Okay.
Equally and respectfully, you could stop the road,
Yeah.
and then actually hold over the disposal or seek further information on the disposal. There's two steps in here. The first one is stop it being road, and then you can decide what you want to do with it. You don't have to necessarily dispose of it.
And that would certainly be my recommendation, given what Evelyn said. I think iwi should have an input into this, given the location of the site. It was not my intention to bypass that at any stage. It was just given to me, and I gave an undertaking to Rodney that I would raise it.
Piece of lobbying, in this case a piece of lobbying when there had been public notification, which had actually allowed for a process to be followed that unfortunately, for whatever reason, the lobbyists didn't take advantage of that